Our first story comes from someone who learned that some parents think their child's presence automatically makes them the main character at any event, entitled "Mom Demanded I Let Her Kid Blow Out My Birthday Candles." So this happened at my 25th birthday party last weekend, and I'm still processing the sheer entitlement I witnessed. I had rented out a small community centre for the evening and invited about 30 of my closest friends and family. Nothing too fancy, but it was important to me because it was the first birthday I'd celebrated since my dad passed away earlier this year, and I wanted to do something special to mark the occasion. Everything was going perfectly. We had great music, good food, and everyone was having a blast. I'd ordered this beautiful chocolate cake from a local bakery that I'd been looking forward to for weeks. It had custom decorations and everything. When it came time for the cake ceremony, everyone gathered around while my mum brought out the cake with all 25 candles lit. That's when this woman, I'd never seen before, pushed through the crowd with her kid in tow. Apparently, she was the plus one of one of my co-workers, though my co-worker later told me she had no idea this woman would act like this. The kid looked to be about 6 or 7 years old, and he immediately started reaching for my cake. I politely moved the cake away from his grabby hands and started getting ready to make my wish. That's when his mother stepped in and said, "Actually, Tyler should blow out the candles. He's just a little boy, and he's been so excited about the cake all evening." I laughed because I thought she was joking. I mean, it was literally my birthday party, but she wasn't laughing back. She had this dead serious expression and actually tried to lift her son up so he could reach the candles better. I told her no, that this was my birthday cake at my birthday party, and I would be blowing out my own candles. She got this indignant look and started going on about how children should always come first at parties, and that as an adult, I should be more considerate of a child's feelings, she said, and I quote, "He's younger than you, so he deserves to have this moment. You can blow out candles any time, but this is special for him." The logic was absolutely mind-boggling. She was essentially arguing that my own birthday celebration should be handed over to her random child because he happened to be present. My friends were starting to stare, and the whole party atmosphere was getting weird. The woman kept insisting that I was being selfish and that any decent person would let a child blow out the candles. She even tried to guilt-trip me by saying her son had been so good all evening and deserved a reward. When I continued to refuse, she actually tried to grab the cake from me. My friend Sarah had to step in and physically block her while I quickly blew out my candles and made my wish. The woman started yelling about how I was ruining her son's night and that I was a terrible hostess. The kid, meanwhile, started crying because his mum had built up this whole fantasy about him getting to blow out someone else's birthday candles. It was obvious he had no idea this wasn't normal behaviour, and honestly, I felt bad for him having a mother who would put him in such an awkward situation. My co-worker was mortified and immediately asked her plus one to leave. As they were walking out, the woman shouted back that I was selfish and that she hoped I learned to be more generous with children in the future. She actually said I had ruined a child's innocence by not letting him blow out my birthday candles. The rest of the party was great once they left, but I couldn't stop thinking about the interaction. Who raises a child to think they're entitled to hijack someone else's birthday celebration? And what kind of adult thinks it's appropriate to demand that a stranger hand over their special moments to appease a random kid? That story is over. I mean, imagine showing up to someone's birthday party and demanding they hand over the main event to your child. The woman literally tried to steal a birthday celebration from the actual birthday person and then had the nerve to call them selfish when they refused. Some people really think having a child gives them the right to commandeer any situation they walk into. Let's move on to our next story, which involves a neighbour who thought property ownership was more of a suggestion than a rule. My neighbour's kid tried to ride my bike, and his mum said it was sharing. I'm Marcus, and this happened about 2 months ago. I had just bought myself a new mountain bike after saving up for almost a year. It's nothing super fancy, but it was a big purchase for me as a college student, and I was really excited about it. I keep it locked up on the bike rack outside my apartment building. Last Tuesday, I was coming home from class when I saw this kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, riding my bike around the parking lot. He wasn't wearing a helmet, and he was clearly struggling with the size since it's built for an adult. My first thought was that maybe he had permission from building management or something, but then I realised that made no sense. I walked over and politely told him that was my bike and asked him to get off. The kid looked startled and started to dismount, but that's when his mother appeared out of nowhere. She had been watching from the building entrance and marched over with this aggressive posture. Instead of apologising or telling her son to return my property, she immediately went on the offensive. She said, "He's just a child having fun. There's no reason you can't share your bike for a few minutes." I explained that I didn't know her or her son, and that he had taken my bike without permission. I mentioned that if something happened to him while riding it, I could be held liable, and that the bike was expensive, and I needed it for getting to work and school. Her response was to roll her eyes and tell me I was being ridiculous. She said, "Kids need exercise and fresh air. You should be happy to help a child stay active, instead of being so greedy about a bike you're not even using right now." The logic was completely backwards. Just because I wasn't actively riding my bike at that exact moment didn't mean it was available for random neighbourhood kids to borrow. I tried to explain this, but she cut me off and said I clearly didn't understand what it meant to be part of a community. She went on this whole rant about how, when she was growing up, neighbours helped each other out and shared resources. She said modern people were too selfish and materialistic, and that I should be ashamed of myself for denying a child something as simple as a bike ride. I told her that if she wanted her son to have a bike, she should buy him one, but that mine wasn't available for borrowing. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling about how not everyone could afford nice things, and that people with more should help those with less. The thing is, I'm a college student working 2 part-time jobs. I'm not exactly living in luxury here. I saved up for months to buy this bike, skipping meals and entertainment to make it happen. But she was treating me like some kind of privileged person who should feel guilty for owning something nice. She told her son to keep riding and said I was being unreasonable. When I moved to physically take my bike back, she accused me of being aggressive toward a child. She started making a scene, yelling about how I was threatening her and her son over just a bike. Other neighbours started coming out to see what the commotion was about. The woman immediately switched tactics and started playing the victim, telling everyone that I was harassing her family and refusing to let her son ride a bike for a few minutes. Fortunately, one of my neighbours who knows me backed me up and confirmed that it was indeed my bike. The building manager also came out and told the woman that residents' property couldn't be used by other tenants without permission. Even faced with multiple people telling her she was wrong, the woman continued to argue that I should be more generous and community-minded. She said her son deserved to have the same opportunities as everyone else, and that meant access to bikes for exercise. Finally, I just took my bike back while she was arguing with the building manager. As I was locking it up, she yelled after me that I was selfish and that she hoped I'd learn what it meant to care about children someday. The next day, I found a note on my bike that said "share" in what was obviously a child's handwriting. I have no idea if the mum put him up to it or if he did it on his own, but it was clear this family felt genuinely wronged by my refusal to let a stranger use my property. That story is over. The mental gymnastics required to turn theft into a sharing lesson is honestly impressive. This woman watched her child take someone else's property without permission and then tried to guilt the owner into allowing it by invoking community spirit and childhood needs. The fact that she doubled down, even when confronted by multiple neighbours, shows how deep this entitlement runs. Our next story takes us 30,000 feet in the air, where apparently the laws of paid seat assignments don't apply to entitled parents. Entitled, Dad Demanded My Seat on the Plane. I was flying from Denver to Miami for a work conference, and I had specifically paid extra to get a window seat. I love window seats on flights, especially long ones, because I can lean against the wall and get some sleep. Plus, I enjoy looking out at the landscape below. The upgrade cost me an additional $45, which isn't nothing on my salary, but I thought it would be worth it for the 5-hour flight. I boarded early, since I'd paid for priority boarding as well, got settled in my seat, and was organising my stuff when this family of 4 approached my row. The dad was leading the way, followed by his wife and 2 kids who looked to be around 8 and 10 years old. The dad stopped at my row and checked his boarding passes, then looked at me with this expectant expression. He said, "Excuse me, I think you're in our seats." I double-checked my boarding pass and confirmed I was in the right place. I showed him my ticket and explained that I was in seat 12A, exactly where I was supposed to be. That's when he told me there had been a misunderstanding. Apparently, his family had been split up during booking, and his younger son really wanted to sit by the window. The dad explained that they had seats scattered throughout the middle section of the plane, and he was hoping I would be willing to switch so his son could have the window seat. I politely declined and explained that I had specifically paid extra for this seat. I offered to help him ask the flight attendant if there were any other solutions, but I wasn't willing to give up the seat I had purchased. That's when his tone completely changed. He said, "Look, he's just a kid. This is probably his first time flying, and seeing out the window would make the whole experience special for him. You're an adult, you can sit anywhere." I explained again that I had paid extra for this specific seat and that I wasn't willing to move to a middle seat in the back of the plane. The man's wife joined the conversation and started talking about how disappointed their son would be if he couldn't look out the window. The dad then said something that really got under my skin. What's more important, making a child happy or your personal comfort? He was trying to frame my completely reasonable position as selfishness, as if I was choosing my own comfort over a child's joy rather than simply keeping the seat I had paid for. I told him that if having a window seat was important for his son, he should have booked and paid for one when he made his reservation. The man got visibly frustrated and said that not everyone could afford to pay extra fees, and that people should be more considerate of families travelling with children. The irony was that this guy was asking me to absorb a financial loss so his family wouldn't have to. He wanted me to give up my $45 seat upgrade for free so he wouldn't have to pay for his own family's comfort. But somehow, I was the inconsiderate one. A flight attendant came over to see what was holding up boarding, and the dad immediately launched into his sob story about his disappointed son and how unreasonable I was being. The flight attendant asked if I would be willing to switch, and I politely but firmly said no. The flight attendant then asked the family to take their assigned seats, so boarding could continue. The dad made a big show of telling his son that some people just don't care about making children happy, and that he was sorry, but the mean lady wouldn't move. The kid, who honestly seemed fine with the whole situation, just shrugged and went to his assigned seat. It was clear that the dad was more worked up about this than his son was. The kid didn't even seem particularly upset about not getting the window seat. Throughout the flight, the dad kept making passive-aggressive comments whenever he walked past my seat to use the bathroom. He would mutter things like, "some people," and "selfish," just loud enough for me to hear. When we were deplaning, he made one final comment about how I had ruined his son's first flight experience. I wanted to point out that his son had seemed perfectly happy during the flight, and that the only person who had been upset was him, but I decided it wasn't worth engaging. That story is over. This dad really thought that having a child automatically entitled him to other people's paid upgrades. The way he tried to emotionally manipulate the situation by making it about disappointing his son was particularly gross, especially since the kid didn't even seem to care about the window seat. Some parents use their children as weapons to get what they want, and it's honestly disgusting. Now let's dive into a workplace story that shows how some parents think their offspring should just automatically inherit other people's career achievements, entitled "Mom Demanded My Co-Worker Give Her Daughter My Job." I work at a marketing firm downtown, and this happened about 3 weeks ago. It's still so bizarre that I'm questioning whether it actually happened, but multiple people witnessed it, so I know I'm not losing my mind. I'm Claire, and I've been working as a junior marketing coordinator for about 18 months. It's not glamorous work, but I enjoy it, and I've been getting good reviews from my supervisors. The pay is decent for someone fresh out of college, and I've been hoping to move up to a senior position within the next year or two. We recently hired a new intern named Jessica, who's about my age, maybe a year younger. She seems nice enough, though she's been struggling a bit with some of the basic tasks. I've tried to help her when I can, showing her how to use our project management software and explaining some of our client processes. Last Friday, I was working late to finish up a presentation for Monday when Jessica's mum showed up at our office. I'd never met her before, but Jessica immediately jumped up and introduced her to a few people. The mum seemed friendly enough, asking questions about the office and commenting on how nice everything looked. That's when things got weird. Jessica's mum walked over to my desk and asked if I was Claire. When I confirmed that I was, she said she wanted to talk to me about Jessica's career development. I figured she was going to ask for advice on how Jessica could improve or something like that. Instead, she told me that Jessica was really struggling with the internship and that it was affecting her self-esteem. She said Jessica had always been a high achiever and that failing at her first professional experience was devastating for her confidence. I tried to be encouraging, explaining that internships are learning experiences and that everyone struggles at first. I told her that Jessica was actually doing better than she thought and just needed more time to get comfortable with everything, but that's not where this conversation was going. Jessica's mum looked me straight in the eye and said, "I think the best solution would be for you to step aside and let Jessica have your position instead." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I asked her to repeat what she'd said, and she clarified that she thought I should quit my job so Jessica could be promoted from intern directly to my role as junior marketing coordinator. Her reasoning was that Jessica had a degree from a more prestigious university than mine, and that she was struggling as an intern only because the position wasn't challenging enough for someone of her caliber. She said that Jessica deserved to have a role that matched her education level, and that meant she should have my job instead of me. I explained that's not how employment works. You can't just decide someone deserves another person's job and expect them to hand it over. I told her that if Jessica wanted a full-time position, she would need to apply for open roles and go through the normal hiring process like everyone else. Jessica's mum got visibly frustrated and started talking about fairness and opportunity. She said that Jessica had spent more money on her education than I had, which meant she deserved better career prospects. She actually asked me what college I'd attended and seemed disappointed that it wasn't as expensive as Jessica's school. She then suggested that since I'd already been in the role for 18 months, I had gotten enough experience and should be ready to move on anyway. She said I was being selfish by staying in a position that could help Jessica build her career. The conversation was happening right in the middle of our open office, and several of my co-workers were starting to stare. Jessica looked absolutely mortified and kept trying to get her mum to stop talking, but her mum was on a roll. She told me that as a young professional, I should want to help other young women succeed, and that holding on to my job when Jessica needed it more was anti-feminist. She said that if I really cared about supporting other women, I would step aside and let Jessica have the opportunity to shine. I told her that I wasn't going to quit my job so her daughter could have it, and that the suggestion was completely inappropriate. That's when she asked to speak to my supervisor. My manager happened to be working late that night, and Jessica's mum marched over to his office and knocked on the door. I followed her because I couldn't believe this was actually happening. She introduced herself and immediately launched into a speech about how I was preventing Jessica from reaching her potential. She told my manager that Jessica was overqualified for the intern position and deserved to be promoted to my role immediately. My manager looked completely bewildered and explained that we don't fire employees to make room for interns, and that Jessica would need to apply for full-time positions when they became available. He also mentioned that Jessica's performance as an intern would be considered if she did apply for jobs in the future. Jessica's mom then accused my manager of running an unfair workplace that didn't recognize talent. She said that any good manager would want the most qualified person in each role, and that meant Jessica should have my job instead of me. At this point, Jessica was practically in tears and kept apologizing to everyone. She dragged her mum toward the elevator, while her mum continued to argue that this wasn't over and that she was going to contact HR about the discriminatory hiring practices. The whole office was dead silent after they left. My manager asked me if I was okay and assured me that my job was completely secure. He said he'd never experienced anything like that in his 20 years of management. Jessica came in on Monday and immediately apologized for her mother's behavior. She said she had no idea her mum was planning to do that and that she was completely embarrassed. She actually offered to quit the internship because she felt so bad about the whole situation. I told her that wasn't necessary and that she shouldn't be held responsible for her mum's actions. But the whole dynamic between us has been weird ever since. I can tell she feels awkward around me, and I feel bad that she's dealing with the aftermath of something she didn't even want to happen. The story got around the office pretty quickly, and now Jessica's mum has become something of a legend among my co-workers. People keep asking me if I'm planning to step aside for the next intern who comes along. That story is over. This mother literally tried to get someone fired so her daughter could skip the normal career progression process. The woman thought expensive tuition meant her daughter deserved to just take someone else's job, like employment is some kind of participation trophy system. Jessica must have been absolutely mortified watching her mum torpedo any chance she had at a professional relationship with her co-workers. Let's move to a Halloween story that proves some parents think trick-or-treat means taking treats from other trick-or-treaters. Entitled, Parent Stole Candy from My Halloween Bucket. This happened last Halloween, and I'm still angry about it months later. I know it sounds petty to be upset about candy, but the principle of what happened was just so wrong. I'm in my early 20s, and I know some people think I'm too old for trick-or-treating, but I love Halloween, and I put a lot of effort into my costume. I dress up every year and go around my neighborhood, and most people are really cool about it. I always say trick or treat enthusiastically and compliment people's decorations, and generally people seem to enjoy my excitement about the holiday. This year, I spent weeks putting together an elaborate vampire costume with professional quality makeup and contact lenses. I was really proud of how it turned out, and I was getting great reactions from homeowners who were impressed with the detail work. I'd been trick-or-treating for about 2 hours and had collected a decent amount of candy. My bucket was probably about half full, with a good mix of chocolate bars, gummy candy, and some of the full-size bars that the generous houses give out. I was having a blast and had gotten tons of compliments on my costume. I was walking down Maple Street when I stopped to admire this house's decorations. They had gone all out with fog machines, animated skeletons, and creepy music. While I was standing there taking it all in, this woman approached me with 2 kids in tow. The kids looked to be maybe 6 and 8 years old, and they were in pretty basic store-bought costumes. Nothing wrong with that, but they definitely hadn't been trick-or-treating as long as I had because their bags looked pretty empty. The mum looked at my bucket and made some comment about how much candy I had collected. I thought she was just making conversation, so I told her I'd been walking around for a couple of hours and that people had been really generous. That's when she said something that should have been a red flag. She told me that her kids had been having bad luck with houses running out of candy before they got there, and that their bags were pretty empty compared to what they'd hoped for. I felt bad for the kids, so I offered to tell them which houses I'd had good luck at. I pointed out a few places that had been giving out full-size bars and mentioned that the house with the elaborate decorations had been really generous. The woman thanked me, but then she did something that completely caught me off guard. She reached into my bucket and grabbed a handful of candy. Not just one piece, but a whole handful of different bars and packages. I was so shocked that I didn't react immediately. She just reached right into my personal candy bucket, like it was a community bowl at a party. When I finally processed what had happened, I asked her what she was doing. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said, "My kids didn't get very much candy tonight, and you have plenty. I'm just evening things out a little." I told her that was my candy that I'd collected myself and asked her to put it back. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're an adult trick-or-treating. These kids actually need the candy more than you do." The logic was insane. Just because I was older didn't mean she had the right to redistribute my Halloween candy to her children. I had walked around for hours collecting that candy, just like everyone else, and age didn't disqualify me from keeping what I'd earned. I held out my hand and told her to return my candy. Instead of complying, she grabbed another handful and dropped it into her younger kid's bag. She told me I was being selfish and that adults should prioritize children's happiness. I raised my voice and demanded that she return my property. That's when she started making a scene, telling anyone within earshot that I was harassing her and her children over candy. She said I was a grown adult bullying kids. On Halloween, several people came over to see what the commotion was about. The woman immediately painted herself as the victim, explaining that I was being aggressive toward her family because I didn't want to share my candy with children. I tried to explain what had actually happened, that she had reached into my bucket and taken my candy without permission. But she kept interrupting and talking over me, insisting that I was the one causing problems. One of the neighbours who had come over to investigate actually sided with her. He told me that Halloween was about making kids happy and that I should be more generous. He said that, as an adult, I should know better than to get into arguments with children over candy. I was getting more and more frustrated because nobody was listening to what had actually happened. This woman had literally stolen from me, and somehow I was being painted as the bad guy for objecting to theft. The woman took advantage of the chaos to grab even more candy from my bucket. By the time I realized what she was doing, she'd taken probably a quarter of everything I had collected that night. I told her I was going to call the police if she didn't return my property. She laughed and said that the cops had better things to do than deal with adults fighting over Halloween candy. She said if I called them, I would be the one who looked ridiculous. She was probably right about that, but I was so angry at this point that I didn't care. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. That's when she finally backed down and told her kids it was time to go. As they were walking away, she yelled back that I should be ashamed of myself for being so greedy when children were involved. She said I had ruined Halloween for her kids by being selfish with my candy. The irony was that she had ruined Halloween for me by stealing my candy, but somehow that didn't matter, because her kids were younger than me. The age difference apparently gave her the right to just take whatever she wanted from my buckets. I spent the rest of the night feeling angry and violated. It wasn't really about the candy itself, but about the principle of someone thinking they could just take my stuff because they decided their kids deserved it more than I did. When I told friends about what happened, some of them sided with the mum. They said that, as an adult, I should have just let it go and been happy to make some kids smile. But I don't think age should disqualify someone from keeping their own property. That story is over. This woman basically mugged someone in a Halloween costume and then tried to play the victim when confronted about literal theft. The fact that bystanders sided with her shows how effective the think of the children manipulation can be, even when those same children are watching their mum steal from strangers. Some parents really teach their kids that wanting something is the same as deserving it. Moving on to our next story, about a neighbour who thought access to other people's property was a basic human right. My sister-in-law demanded I let her kids use my pool. I'm Kelly, and this happened about a month ago during one of those really hot summer days we've been having. I had taken a personal day from work to relax and maybe get some pool time in at my house. I'd been looking forward to it all week because work had been absolutely insane, and I just wanted to float around and decompress. I live in a pretty quiet suburban neighbourhood, and my backyard is fenced in with a privacy fence, so I figured I'd have a peaceful day to myself. I'd made myself a nice lunch, grabbed a book, and was settling in on one of my pool floats when I heard voices coming from my backyard. I looked up and saw my sister-in-law Janet standing by my back gate with her 3 kids, ages 7, 9, and 12. They were all in swimsuits and carrying pool toys. Janet was holding bolt cutters. Now let me give you some context here. Janet is married to my husband's brother, and we've never really gotten along. She has this entitled attitude about everything, and seems to think that family means she can just take whatever she wants from us. My husband tries to keep the peace, but honestly, she drives me crazy. I got out of the pool and walked over to where they were standing. I asked Janet what she was doing in my backyard, and she said, "Oh, good, you're here. The kids really wanted to swim today, and our community pool is closed for maintenance. I figured you wouldn't mind if we used yours for a few hours." I told her that, actually, I did mind, and that she should have called first before bringing her kids over. I explained that I had taken the day off to relax and wasn't prepared to supervise 3 children at my pool. That's when Janet got defensive. She said that family should be willing to help each other out, and that it was selfish of me to have a pool and not share it with the kids. She pointed out that I don't have children of my own, so I couldn't possibly understand how hard it was to keep kids entertained during summer break. I told her that whether or not I have kids wasn't relevant, and that my pool wasn't a public facility that was open to whoever wanted to use it. I said if she wanted the kids to swim, she should have made arrangements at another pool or waited for their community pool to reopen. Janet then said something that really set me off. She told me that she'd already promised the kids they could swim, and that if I made them leave now, I'd be the mean aunt who ruined their day. She was basically trying to guilt-trip me by using her own poor planning as leverage. I stood my ground and told her that her promises to her children weren't my responsibility, and that she should have asked permission before making plans that involved my property. That's when she pointed to the bolt cutters and said she'd already cut the lock on my back gate to get in. I was furious. Not only had she trespassed on my property with her kids, but she'd actually damaged my fence to do it. I told her she needed to leave immediately and that I'd be sending her a bill for the lock replacement. Janet laughed and said I was being dramatic over a cheap lock. She said the kids were already here and ready to swim, so we might as well just let them enjoy themselves for a few hours. She told me I could go back to my book and pretend they weren't even there. I explained that having children in my pool without proper supervision was a liability issue, and that I wasn't comfortable being responsible for their safety when I hadn't agreed to watch them in the first place. I also mentioned that I had specifically taken the day off to be alone and relax. That's when Janet played the family card again. She said that blood is thicker than water, and that turning away family members in need was something I'd regret. She claimed that her kids looked up to me as their aunt, and that rejecting them would damage our relationship permanently. The manipulation was so obvious, but I could see that her kids were getting caught in the middle of this adult argument. They looked confused and disappointed, and I felt bad for them even though I was angry at their mother. I told Janet one more time that she needed to leave, and that if she wanted to use my pool in the future, she needed to call ahead and ask permission like a normal person. I said breaking into my yard wasn't acceptable under any circumstances. Janet got really nasty then. She said I was a selfish person who cared more about my precious alone time than about family relationships. She told her kids that Aunt Kelly was too mean to let them swim, and that some people just don't understand what it means to be generous. The kids started whining and asking why they couldn't swim, and Janet made a big show of explaining that I was being unfair and that they'd have to find somewhere else to go. She was clearly trying to make me look like the villain in front of her children. I watched them pack up their pool toys and leave through my damaged back gate. As they were walking away, Janet yelled back that she was going to tell the whole family about how unwelcoming I was, and that I shouldn't expect any help from her in the future. The whole encounter left me feeling angry and violated. It wasn't just about the pool usage, but about the complete disrespect for my property and my right to say no to uninvited guests. The fact that she'd cut my lock and then tried to make me feel guilty for objecting was particularly infuriating. When my husband got home that evening, I told him what had happened. He was supportive and agreed that Janet had crossed a major line by breaking into our yard. He called his brother to discuss the situation, but apparently Janet had already given her version of events, where I was the unreasonable one. The family drama that followed was exhausting. Janet told everyone that I had refused to let her kids swim and had been hostile to them for no reason. She left out the parts about trespassing and damaging property, painting herself as a struggling mum who just wanted her kids to have fun. Some family members sided with me, but others thought I should have just let the kids swim since they were already there. They said family should be more important than maintaining boundaries, and that I was being petty about a few hours of pool time. I ended up having to install a better lock and reinforce my gate to prevent future break-ins. The whole thing cost me about $200 and a lot of stress that I definitely didn't need. Janet and I haven't spoken since the incident, which is honestly fine with me, but the family gatherings have been awkward, with people taking sides and whispering about the pool incident. It's frustrating that standing up for my own property rights has somehow become controversial within my own family. That story is over. The fact that she came prepared with bolt cutters shows this wasn't a spontaneous decision, but a premeditated break-in. Cutting someone's lock and then playing the victim when confronted is next-level manipulation. Using her kids as emotional weapons while teaching them that breaking and entering is acceptable behavior makes this even worse. Some people really think the word family is a magic key that unlocks other people's property. Let's move to a story about a parent who thought academic success should be a group effort. The dad who said, I should tutor his kid for free. I'm Brian, and I'm a junior in high school. I've always been pretty good at math, and I usually score in the top 5% on tests and assignments. It's not that I'm naturally gifted or anything. I just really enjoy problem solving, and I put in the time to understand the concepts thoroughly. Word gets around in a small school, so people know that I'm one of the stronger math students. I don't mind helping classmates occasionally if they're stuck on a homework problem or need clarification on something the teacher explained. It's actually kind of fun to help people understand concepts that click easily for me. About 2 months ago, this kid named Tyler started asking me for help more and more frequently. At first it was just quick questions between classes or during lunch, but then he started wanting me to sit with him for entire homework assignments and explain every single problem step by step. I didn't mind helping Tyler, but it was becoming a pretty big time commitment. I'd spend my lunch periods and free time essentially doing his homework with him instead of hanging out with my friends or working on my own assignments. Tyler seemed nice enough, but he wasn't putting in much effort to actually learn the material. The situation got weird when Tyler's dad approached me after school one day. I was waiting for my ride when this man walked up to me and introduced himself as Tyler's father. He seemed friendly at first, thanking me for helping his son with math and saying that Tyler's grades had improved since I'd been working with him. Then he asked if we could set up a regular tutoring schedule. He wanted me to come to their house 3 times a week for 2-hour sessions to help Tyler with all his math homework and test preparation. When I asked about payment, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He said, "Oh, we weren't planning to pay you anything. You're just a kid helping another kid. Besides, you're good at this stuff naturally, so it's not really work for you." I explained that 2 hours, 3 times a week was a significant time commitment, and that I usually spent that time on my own homework, sports practice, or hanging out with friends. I said that if he wanted regular tutoring sessions, I'd need to charge something for my time. Tyler's dad got this annoyed expression and said that kids shouldn't be charging other kids for help with schoolwork. He said that when he was in high school, students helped each other out without expecting payment, and that charging for tutoring was greedy and inappropriate. I tried to explain that occasional help between friends was different from structured tutoring sessions that would take up 6 hours of my week. I mentioned that professional tutors charge $20 to $30 an hour, and that even high school tutors usually get paid something for their time. He waved that off and said that professional tutors were adults with expenses, while I was just a teenager who should be happy to help a classmate. He said that Tyler really needed the help and that I should want to see a fellow student succeed. The conversation was getting uncomfortable, but Tyler's dad wasn't done. He told me that Tyler's family was going through some financial difficulties and that they couldn't afford to pay for tutoring. He said that as someone who was naturally good at math, I had a responsibility to help students who were struggling. I felt bad about their financial situation, but I also knew that 6 hours a week was a lot to ask for free. I offered to continue helping Tyler occasionally during school hours, but said I couldn't commit to regular evening sessions without some kind of compensation. That's when Tyler's dad got really pushy. He said that I was being selfish and that smart kids should use their abilities to help others instead of trying to profit from them. He told me that refusing to help Tyler would hurt his academic progress and potentially damage his future college prospects. The guilt trip was pretty intense. He made it sound like Tyler's entire educational future depended on my willingness to provide free tutoring services. He said that I had been blessed with mathematical ability and that it was my duty to share that gift with students who were less fortunate. I told him I'd think about it, but honestly, I just wanted to get away from the conversation. The whole interaction had made me really uncomfortable, and I felt like he was trying to manipulate me into agreeing to something I didn't want to do. The next day at school, Tyler approached me with a different attitude. Instead of asking politely for help like he used to, he seemed to expect that I would drop everything to work on his assignments with him. When I said I was busy with my own homework, he got frustrated and said his dad had told him I'd agreed to regular tutoring sessions. I explained that I hadn't agreed to anything and that I'd only said I would think about it. Tyler said his dad was expecting me to come over that evening for our first official session and that he'd already told his mum to prepare snacks for us. I felt terrible, but I had to tell Tyler that I couldn't commit to regular tutoring sessions. I offered to continue helping him occasionally during school, but said I couldn't dedicate multiple evenings per week to working on his homework with him. Tyler got upset and said I was going back on my promise. He said his dad had been really excited about the tutoring arrangement and that cancelling would make him look bad at home. He begged me to reconsider, saying that he really needed the help and couldn't afford a real tutor. The whole situation had gotten so complicated and stressful. I felt guilty about disappointing Tyler, but I also knew that committing to 6 hours of free tutoring per week wasn't realistic or fair to me. I had my own academic goals and commitments to consider. That evening, Tyler's dad called my house and spoke to my parents. He told them that I had agreed to tutor Tyler and then backed out at the last minute, leaving their family in a difficult position. He painted me as unreliable and selfish for refusing to help a struggling student. My parents were confused because they knew I hadn't made any firm commitments about tutoring. When they asked me to explain the situation, I told them about both conversations and how pressured I'd felt to agree to something I didn't want to do. Fortunately, my parents supported my decision not to commit to regular, unpaid tutoring sessions. They agreed that 6 hours a week was a significant time commitment and that expecting a teenager to provide professional-level services for free was unreasonable. But Tyler's dad didn't give up. He started calling regularly, asking if I'd reconsidered and emphasizing how much Tyler needed the help. He would mention Tyler's grades and stress levels, trying to make me feel responsible for his academic struggles. He also started approaching me at school events and in public places around town. Every time he saw me, he'd bring up the tutoring situation and ask when I was planning to start helping Tyler again. The constant pressure was really stressful and made me want to avoid places where I might run into him. The worst part was that Tyler and I could no longer have a normal classmate relationship. He was clearly disappointed and hurt that I wouldn't provide the extensive help his dad had promised. Our previous friendly dynamic had been completely destroyed by his father's demands and expectations. Eventually, I had to ask a teacher to intervene because the situation was affecting my ability to focus on my own studies. The teacher spoke to Tyler's dad and explained that students couldn't be required to provide free tutoring services to their classmates, and that the pressure needed to stop. Tyler's family ended up finding a college student who was willing to tutor him for a reduced rate. I heard later that they were much happier with that arrangement, and that Tyler was actually learning better from someone who was trained in tutoring techniques. The whole experience taught me that it's okay to set boundaries around helping others, even when they're in genuine need. I still help classmates when I can, but I'm more careful about not letting occasional assistance turn into ongoing obligations that I never actually agreed to. That story is over. This dad basically tried to conscript a teenager into unpaid labour and then used emotional manipulation when that didn't work. The fact that he told his son the tutoring was already arranged before getting confirmation shows how manipulative and presumptuous he was. Expecting 6 hours of free professional services from a high school student while playing the victim about finances is particularly gross. Some parents will sacrifice other people's children to benefit their own without a second thought. Our next story involves a dog park encounter that escalated into attempted pet theft, entitled "Mom Tried to Take My Dog Because Her Daughter Liked It." This happened about 2 weeks ago at my local dog park, and I'm still completely shaken by the whole experience. I have a golden retriever named Luna, who's absolutely gorgeous and has the sweetest temperament you could imagine. She's 3 years old, perfectly trained, and honestly, my best friend in the world. I was at the dog park around 4 in the afternoon, which is usually a pretty busy time. Luna was running around playing with the other dogs while I sat on one of the benches, chatting with some of the regular dog owners I'd gotten to know over the past few months. That's when this little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, came running over to Luna with her arms outstretched. Luna loves kids, so she immediately went over to say hello and let the girl pet her. The kid was absolutely delighted and kept saying how beautiful Luna was and how much she loved her. I walked over to make sure everything was okay and to keep an eye on the interaction. The little girl looked up at me and asked if Luna was my dog. When I said yes, she got this huge smile and asked if she could keep petting her. I told her that was fine, and we started chatting about dogs. She said her name was Emma and that she'd been begging her parents for a golden retriever for years. She seemed like a really sweet kid, and Luna was clearly enjoying all the attention and belly rubs. After about 10 minutes, Emma's mother walked over to see what was going on. She watched her daughter playing with Luna for a moment, then turned to me with this expectant look. She said, "Emma absolutely loves your dog. She's been asking for one just like this for her birthday next month." I smiled and said that golden retrievers were wonderful family pets, and that I hoped they'd be able to find a good breeder or rescue organisation when they were ready to get a dog. I started to give her some advice about what to look for in a puppy, but she cut me off. She said, "Actually, we were thinking Emma could just have this one. She's already so attached and it would break her heart to leave without her." I laughed because I thought she was joking. I mean, who seriously suggests taking someone else's dog home from the park? But when I looked at her face, she was completely serious. She was actually standing there, expecting me to hand over my beloved pet to her daughter. I told her that Luna wasn't available, and that if they wanted a golden retriever, they'd need to get their own. The woman's expression immediately shifted from expectant to annoyed. She said that Emma had fallen in love with Luna specifically, and that getting a different dog wouldn't be the same. She went on to explain that Emma had been having a really hard time lately because they'd recently moved to a new city and she was struggling to make friends at her new school. She said that having Luna would help Emma adjust and give her something to focus on, besides missing her old life. I felt bad for Emma's situation, but I explained that Luna had been my companion for 3 years, and that she wasn't going anywhere. I suggested they could visit the dog park regularly, so Emma could interact with friendly dogs while they looked for their own pets. The woman got visibly frustrated and said that I was being selfish. She pointed out that I was clearly an adult with no children, while Emma was just a little girl who needed emotional support during a difficult transition. She said that giving Luna to Emma would be a kind gesture that could really make a difference in a child's life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was seriously arguing that I should give away my dog because her daughter was sad about moving. I told her again that Luna wasn't available and that I hoped they'd find a good dog of their own soon. That's when Emma's mom tried a different approach. She asked how much I'd paid for Luna and offered to reimburse me. When I said Luna wasn't for sale at any price, she got angry and said that I was being unreasonable and cruel to a child. She told Emma to say goodbye to Luna because the mean lady wouldn't let her keep the nice doggy. Emma started crying and asked why she couldn't take Luna home with her. The mother made a big show of comforting her daughter while glaring at me like I was some kind of monster. I started walking toward the gate with Luna, but the woman followed us. She kept talking about how disappointed Emma was and how I could easily get another dog if I really wanted one. She said that Emma would take better care of Luna than I probably did, since children and dogs naturally belong together. When we got to the parking lot, the woman actually tried to take Luna's leash from my hand. She said she was just going to borrow Luna for a few days, so Emma could have some time with her, and that I could pick her up later in the week. I pulled Luna away and told the woman to back off immediately. That's when she started yelling about how selfish dog owners ruin things for families who actually need pets for their children's well-being. She said I was probably lonely and using Luna as a substitute for human relationships. Other people in the parking lot were starting to stare, and I was getting genuinely scared that this woman might try to grab Luna and run. I called 911 and told them that someone was trying to steal my dog. The woman heard me talking to the dispatcher and finally backed down. She grabbed Emma's hand and started walking toward their car while yelling back that I was a horrible person for disappointing a child over a dog that I didn't even really need. The police showed up about 10 minutes later and took a report. They said this kind of thing happened more often than people would think, and that I'd done the right thing by calling for help. They offered to escort me to my car, which I appreciated since I was still pretty shaken up. I haven't been back to that dog park since then, even though it was Luna's favourite place to play. I keep worrying that we might run into that woman and her daughter again, and I don't want to deal with another confrontation. The whole experience made me realise how entitled some parents can be when it comes to getting things for their children. This woman genuinely believed that her daughter's desire for my dog was more important than my right to keep my own pet. That story is over. The mother literally tried to steal someone's dog and then played the victim when she got called out. Using her daughter's moving anxiety as justification for attempted pet theft is particularly twisted. The fact that she followed them to the parking lot and tried to grab the leash shows this wasn't just poor judgment, but actual criminal behaviour. Some parents will try to take anything their kids want, even living beings with their own families. Let's move to a gaming story that shows how some parents think expensive electronics should just be redistributed to whoever wants them most. The mother who insisted I give her kid my PS5. I'm Ethan, and this happened about a month ago at my workplace. I work at a small tech startup with maybe 20 employees, and we're all pretty close-knit. Most of us are in our 20s and early 30s, and we often talk about gaming, movies, and other shared interests during breaks. I'd been trying to get a PlayStation 5 since they launched, like pretty much everyone else. After months of checking websites and dealing with scalpers, I finally managed to snag one during a random restock. I was absolutely thrilled and probably talked about it too much at work for the next few days. My co-worker Jessica seemed happy for me, and we talked about some of the games I was planning to get. She mentioned that her 16-year-old son, Marcus, was also really into gaming, and that he'd been wanting a PS5 as well. I said it was a great system, and that I hoped he'd be able to get one soon. About a week later, Jessica's mum came to pick her up from work. Jessica had mentioned before that her mum sometimes gave her rides when her car was in the shop. I'd seen the woman a few times in the lobby, but we'd never really talked beyond polite hellos. This time, though, the woman approached me while I was waiting for my own ride. She introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson and said that Jessica had told her about my new gaming system. She seemed friendly enough at first, asking about the games and features. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. She told me that Marcus had been really disappointed about not being able to get a PS5 and that it was affecting his grades because he was so distracted by wanting one. I made some sympathetic noises about how frustrating it must be for him and mentioned that hopefully Sony would increase production soon so more people could get them. I thought that would be the end of the conversation, but Mrs. Patterson had other ideas. She said that she'd been thinking about the situation and that maybe I could help Marcus out by letting him have my PS5. She said that since I was an adult with a full-time job, I could probably just buy another one when they became more available. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. Then I told her that I'd waited months to get my PS5 and that I wasn't interested in giving it away. I explained that they were still really hard to find and that I was looking forward to playing the games I'd bought for it. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised by my response, like she genuinely hadn't expected me to say no. She told me that Marcus was just a teenager who didn't have the same opportunities that adults had to get expensive electronics. She said that sharing with young people was the right thing to do. I explained that this wasn't about sharing, but about her asking me to give away something that had cost me $500 and months of effort to obtain. I said that if Marcus wanted a PS5, his family should look into getting him one through normal retail channels. That's when Mrs. Patterson got defensive. She said that not everyone could afford to just buy gaming systems whenever they wanted them, and that I should be more considerate of families who were struggling financially. She pointed out that I was single with no kids, so I had more disposable income than parents did. I tried to stay polite, but I was getting frustrated. I told her that my personal financial situation didn't obligate me to give away my belongings to other people's children. I said that wanting something wasn't the same as deserving it, and that Marcus would need to wait like everyone else. Mrs. Patterson then tried a different approach. She asked if I'd consider letting Marcus borrow the PS5 for a few weeks, just until his grades improved and he felt better about the situation. She promised that he'd take good care of it and return it in perfect condition. I said no to that as well, explaining that I'd bought the system for myself and wanted to use it. I mentioned that I'd already set up my games and saved files and that I wasn't comfortable lending out expensive electronics to people I didn't know well. The conversation was getting more and more uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson kept pushing, suggesting different arrangements that might work. Maybe I could bring the PS5 to their house on weekends so Marcus could play it. Maybe we could work out a schedule where he could use it after school while I was at work. Every suggestion involved me giving up access to something I'd bought for myself so that her son could use it instead. When I declined each offer, she acted like I was being unreasonable and selfish. Finally, she played the emotional manipulation card. She told me that Marcus had been having a really hard time lately, and that getting a PS5 would mean the world to him. She said that I had the power to make a teenage boy incredibly happy, and that choosing not to help him said something about my character. I told her that I understood she wanted to make her grandson happy, but that asking strangers to give away their possessions wasn't the way to do it. I said that if gaming was important to Marcus, there were other systems available that were easier to find and less expensive. Mrs. Patterson got visibly angry then. She said that I was selfish and immature for caring more about playing video games than about a child's happiness. She accused me of being the kind of person who only thought about themselves and never considered helping others. She said that when she was younger, people were more generous and community-minded. She claimed that nowadays, everyone was too focused on their own entertainment to care about children who were less fortunate. At that point, my ride arrived and I was grateful for an excuse to end the conversation. I told Mrs. Patterson that I hoped Marcus would be able to get a PS5 eventually, but that it wouldn't be mine. I walked away while she was still talking about how disappointed she was in my attitude. The next day at work, Jessica approached me looking embarrassed. She apologised for her mother's behaviour and said she'd had no idea that Mrs. Patterson was planning to ask me about the PS5. She said her mum had gotten carried away and that she didn't expect me to give up my gaming system. I appreciated Jessica's apology, but the whole situation had made things weird between us at work. I could tell she felt bad about what her mother had done, and I felt awkward knowing that they'd been discussing my personal property at home. About a week later, Mrs. Patterson showed up at our office again. This time, she brought Marcus with her. She introduced him to me and made a big show of talking about how much he loved gaming and how disappointed he was about not having a PS5. The kid seemed nice enough, but it was obvious that his grandmother was trying to use him to guilt-trip me into changing my mind. She kept mentioning how hard he'd been working to improve his grades and how much he deserved something special. I felt bad for Marcus because he was clearly being used as a prop in his grandmother's campaign to get my gaming system. He looked embarrassed every time she brought up the PS5, and I could tell he hadn't asked her to approach me about it. I told Marcus that I hoped he'd be able to get a PS5 soon, and that there were some great games available for it. I tried to be encouraging without giving his grandmother any ammunition for her continued pressure campaign. Mrs. Patterson wasn't satisfied with polite conversation, though. She asked Marcus to tell me about his grades and how hard he'd been working in school. She was clearly hoping that hearing directly from her grandson would make me more sympathetic to their situation. When that didn't work, she tried one more guilt trip. She told me that Marcus had been saving up his allowance and birthday money to buy a PS5, but that it would take him months to save enough, even if he could find one available for purchase. I acknowledged that it was frustrating to save up for something that was hard to find, but I maintained that I wasn't giving away my gaming system. I suggested that Marcus might want to look into other gaming options while he continued saving for a PS5. Mrs. Patterson finally gave up after that visit, but the whole experience had been exhausting. I'd spent weeks dealing with someone who genuinely believed that her grandson's desire for my property was more important than my right to keep it. The worst part was that she'd involved Marcus in her campaign, making him uncomfortable and probably teaching him that it was okay to expect other people to give him things he wanted. The kid seemed embarrassed by his grandmother's behaviour, and I felt bad that he'd been put in such an awkward position. That story is over. This grandmother really thought she could pressure a stranger into giving away a $500 gaming system because her grandson wanted it. The way she kept escalating and bringing different family members into the guilt campaign shows how calculated the whole thing was. Using a teenager as an emotional weapon while teaching him that other people owe him their possessions is particularly damaging parenting. Some people really believe that wanting something badly enough creates an obligation for others to provide it. Moving on to a vacation story that proves some parents think their children's happiness overrides basic courtesy and fairness, entitled Parent Tried to Cut in Line at Disney. This happened last month during my family's long-planned trip to Disney World. My wife and I had been saving for this vacation for over a year, and we were there with our two daughters, ages 6 and 9. We'd done all the research, made our reservations, and were really looking forward to making some magical memories together. On our second day at the park, we decided to ride Space Mountain, which is one of the most popular attractions. Even though we had FastPass reservations, there was still a pretty significant wait time. We got in line around 2 in the afternoon and were told the wait would be about 45 minutes. My girls were being incredibly patient, and we were having fun talking about the ride and playing little games to pass the time. We'd been waiting for about 30 minutes and could see that we were getting close to the loading area when this family of 5 pushed past us. It wasn't subtle at all. The mother was leading the way, followed by her husband and 3 kids who looked to be between 7 and 12 years old. They just walked right past everyone in line like they owned the place, ignoring the dirty looks and comments from other guests. When they got to the spot right in front of us, they stopped and acted like they'd been there the whole time. The mother turned around and made eye contact with me, but instead of looking apologetic or embarrassed, she had this defiant expression like she was daring me to say something. I politely tapped her on the shoulder and told her that there was a line and that they needed to go to the back if they wanted to ride. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language and said, "My children have been waiting all day for this ride." I explained that everyone in line had been waiting and that cutting wasn't fair to the people who had arrived before them. I pointed out that my daughters had been patiently standing in line for 30 minutes and that jumping ahead of them wasn't appropriate. The woman got immediately defensive and said that her kids were younger than mine and deserved to go first. She claimed that children should always take priority over adults and that I should understand that as a parent myself. I told her that age didn't determine line order and that arrival time was what mattered. I said that if her children couldn't wait in line like everyone else, then maybe they weren't ready for the ride in the first place. That's when her husband joined the conversation. He said that their family had paid just as much for park admission as everyone else, and that they had the right to enjoy the attractions without waiting in unreasonably long lines. I explained that everyone had paid the same admission price, and that the cost of entry didn't include the right to cut in front of other guests. I mentioned that there were fast-pass options available if they wanted to reduce their wait times. The mother then said something that really got under my skin. She told me that my girls looked old enough to handle disappointment, while her younger children would be devastated if they had to wait any longer. She was that my essentially arguing kids mattered less because they were more mature. Other people in line were starting to get involved, telling the family that they needed to move to the back. The woman responded by getting louder and more dramatic, claiming that everyone was ganging up on her family and ruining their vacation. She started making a scene about how unfair everyone was being to her children, who hadn't done anything wrong. She said that adults should be more understanding of families with young kids, and that the magical Disney experience was being destroyed by selfish people. A Disney cast member finally came over to see what was causing the disturbance. The woman immediately launched into her victim narrative, explaining that her children were being discriminated against because of their age and that other guests were being hostile toward her family. The cast member listened patiently and then asked the family to step aside so she could sort out the situation. She explained that line cutting wasn't allowed and that all guests needed to wait their turn regardless of age or family size. The mother got even more dramatic, talking about how much money they'd spent on their vacation and how disappointed her children would be if they had to go to the back of the line. She said that Disney was supposed to be about making children happy, not about enforcing arbitrary rules. The cast member remained professional and offered to help the family find other attractions with shorter wait times. She suggested that they could use the Disney app to check wait times throughout the park and plan their day more efficiently. But the mother wasn't interested in reasonable solutions. She wanted to stay exactly where she was and seemed to think that making enough of a scene would get her what she wanted. She kept pointing to her children and talking about how upset they were getting. The funny thing was that her kids didn't actually seem that upset. They looked embarrassed by their mother's behaviour and kept trying to get her to stop making a scene. The oldest boy actually told his mum that they should just go to the back of the line, but she shushed him. Finally, the cast member had to call security to escort the family out of the line. As they were leaving, the mother yelled back that Disney had lost a loyal customer and that she was going to write negative reviews about how poorly families were treated at the park. She made sure everyone could hear her talking about how her children's vacation had been ruined by selfish adults who couldn't share a ride with kids who deserved it more. She was still playing the victim, even as security was walking her family away from the attraction. The rest of us in line were able to move forward normally after that, and we finally got to ride Space Mountain about 15 minutes later. My daughters had a great time on the ride, and we didn't let the earlier drama affect our enjoyment of the park. That mother had been willing, but I kept thinking about how she chose to cause such a huge scene, rather than simply wait in line like everyone else. She had basically taught her children that making noise and playing the victim could get them what they wanted, which seemed like a terrible lesson. The experience also made me appreciate how patient and well-behaved my own daughters had been throughout the whole ordeal. They watched the entire confrontation without complaining or asking why we couldn't cut in line too. They understood that fairness meant waiting your turn, regardless of how much you wanted something. That story is over. This mother turned a family vacation into a public spectacle rather than teach her kids basic courtesy and patience. The way she tried to use her children's ages as justification for cutting in front of other families shows how twisted her sense of fairness was. What's worse is that her own kids seemed to understand that line cutting was wrong, but she kept pushing anyway. Some parents are so focused on giving their children everything they want that they forget to teach them how to function in society. Let's move to a neighbourhood dispute that escalated when one parent decided vehicle ownership should be based on need rather than purchase. The neighbour, who said her son deserved my car. I'm Sarah, and this happened about 6 weeks ago in my apartment complex parking lot. I'd just gotten home from work and was pulling into my assigned space when I noticed my neighbour Linda standing by her car with her teenage son. I'd seen them around the building, but we'd never really talked beyond polite hellos. As I was getting out of my car, Linda walked over with this weird smile on her face. She complimented my car, which is a 2-year-old Honda Civic that I'd saved up for months to buy. Nothing fancy, but it was my first car purchase after college, and I was really proud of it. Linda started asking questions about the car. How much I'd paid, whether I liked driving it, if it was reliable. I thought she was just making conversation, maybe considering buying something similar for her family. Her son Kyle was standing behind her, looking uncomfortable, but I figured he was just shy. Then Linda said something that completely blindsided me. She told me that Kyle had just turned 16 and really needed a car to get to his job at the grocery store. She said public transportation was unreliable and that walking to work wasn't safe in our neighbourhood. I made some sympathetic comments about how tough it must be for him to get around without a car. I mentioned that I'd used public transit for years before saving up for my Honda, and that hopefully they'd be able to find something affordable soon. That's when Linda dropped the bomb. She said that since I was young and single, I could probably just get another car pretty easily. She suggested that Kyle needed my car more than I did because he was starting his adult life and deserved to have reliable transportation. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. I told her that my car wasn't for sale and that if Kyle needed transportation, they should look into buying him something within their budget. Linda got this annoyed expression and said that not everyone had the luxury of being able to afford car payments. She pointed out that I didn't have any kids to support, so I had more disposable income than families did. She said that helping young people get started in life was something the community should prioritise. I explained that I worked 2 jobs to afford my car payments and insurance, and that my financial situation wasn't as comfortable as she seemed to think. I said that wanting a car wasn't the same as deserving someone else's car. Linda then tried a different approach. She asked if I'd consider letting Kyle borrow my car for work, just until they could figure out a more permanent solution. She promised he was a responsible driver and would take good care of it. I declined and explained that I needed my car to get to my own job. I mentioned that lending out a vehicle created liability issues and that I wasn't comfortable with that arrangement. That's when Linda got really pushy. She said that I was being selfish and that young people like Kyle deserved support from adults in the community. She claimed that I was preventing a hard-working teenager from being able to keep his job. Kyle looked mortified and kept trying to get his mum to stop talking. He told her that he could figure out transportation on his own and that they should just go inside. But Linda wasn't done with her campaign. She started talking about how when she was growing up, neighbours helped each other out and shared resources. She said that modern people were too focused on material possessions and not enough on helping their community members succeed. I told Linda that I understood her concern for Kyle, but that asking someone to give up their primary means of transportation wasn't a reasonable request. I said that if reliable transportation was important for Kyle's job, they should look into used car lots or financing options. Linda got visibly frustrated and said that I clearly didn't understand what it meant to be part of a community. She accused me of caring more about a car than about a teenager's future prospects. She then made a comment that really set me off. She said that people without children didn't understand sacrifice, and that I'd probably never learned to put anyone else's needs before my own wants. I told her that was completely inappropriate, and that my personal choices about family didn't obligate me to give away my possessions to other people's children. I said that Kyle seemed like a nice kid, but that his transportation needs weren't my responsibility. Linda started making a scene in the parking lot, talking loudly about how selfish some people were, and how disappointing it was to live in a community where neighbours wouldn't help each other. Other residents were starting to come out to see what was going on. Kyle was clearly embarrassed and kept apologising to me while trying to get his mum to go inside. I felt bad for him because he was obviously not on board with his mother's demands and was getting caught in the middle of her entitled behaviour. Finally, I told Linda that the conversation was over and that I needed to get inside. As I was walking away, she yelled after me that I'd regret being so selfish when I needed help from my neighbours someday. The whole encounter left me feeling violated and angry. It wasn't just about the car, but about the complete disrespect for my right to keep my own property. The fact that she'd tried to guilt-trip me using Kyle's job situation made it even worse. Over the next few weeks, Linda continued to make passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me in the hallway or parking lot. She'd make loud remarks about how some people had more than they needed while others struggled to get by. I ended up talking to the building management about the harassment, and they spoke to Linda about appropriate neighbour interactions. The comments stopped after that, but the whole situation had made living in the building uncomfortable. Kyle eventually found a different solution for getting to work, and I heard from other neighbours that he'd been mortified by his mother's behaviour. I felt bad that their family dynamic had been affected by Linda's unrealistic expectations. The experience taught me that some people genuinely believe that having less means you're entitled to what others have worked for. Linda couldn't accept that her son's transportation needs didn't create an obligation for me to solve them. That story's over. The idea that being childless somehow makes you responsible for funding other people's kids is absolutely twisted logic. This woman really thought financial need creates an automatic right to other people's property, and she used her own son as an emotional weapon to try to get it. Kyle deserved better than a mum who would publicly humiliate him while trying to guilt strangers into giving away their cars. Let's move to a story about a parent who thought having a babysitter was a basic human right. Entitled "Mum Insisted I Babysit for Free." This happened about 3 months ago, and I'm still processing how entitled this woman was. I'm Jessica, and I live in a small apartment complex with about 12 units. Most of the tenants are young professionals or college students, and we generally all get along pretty well. My upstairs neighbour is a single mum named Patricia, who has 2 kids, ages 5 and 8. I'd helped her out occasionally when she was in a pinch, like accepting packages when she wasn't home, or letting her kids wait in my apartment for a few minutes when she was running late from work. Patricia seemed grateful for these small favours, and I didn't mind helping out since I knew being a single parent was challenging. The kids were generally well behaved, and these situations only came up maybe once a month. But then Patricia's work schedule changed, and she started having to work some evening shifts. That's when the requests for help became more frequent and more demanding. It started with her asking if I could watch the kids for an hour or 2 while she went to work. I agreed the first few times because I felt bad for her situation, and the kids usually just watched TV or did homework while I worked on my laptop. But 1 hour turned into 3 hours, and twice a week turned into 4 times a week. Patricia was essentially using me as her regular childcare provider without ever discussing compensation or whether I was actually available. The breaking point came when Patricia knocked on my door on a Friday night and told me she needed me to watch the kids overnight because she had to work a double shift. She said she'd already told them they were having a sleepover at my place. I told her that I had plans for the evening and couldn't babysit. Patricia looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I would refuse to help her. She said that her job was really important and that she couldn't afford to miss work. I explained that while I sympathised with her situation, I had my own life and commitments. I said that if she needed regular childcare, she should look into hiring a babysitter or finding a daycare that offered evening hours. Patricia got defensive and said that she couldn't afford professional childcare on her salary. She pointed out that I was home most evenings anyway, so watching her kids wasn't really an inconvenience for me. I told her that being home didn't mean I was available to provide free babysitting services. I explained that I use my evenings to work on freelance projects, maintain my apartment, and have some personal time to relax. That's when Patricia played the single mother card. She said that people without children couldn't understand how hard it was to balance work and parenting responsibilities. She claimed that neighbours should help each other out, especially when children were involved. She started getting emotional, talking about how stressful her life was, just trying to provide for her family. She said that asking for help shouldn't be so controversial and that she'd do the same for me if I ever had kids. I felt bad seeing her upset, but I also knew that I couldn't become her unpaid nanny just because she was struggling. I offered to help her find resources for affordable childcare or connect her with other parents who might be interested in babysitting exchanges. Patricia rejected all of these suggestions and said that I was the only person she trusted with her children. She claimed that her kids were comfortable with me and that finding someone new would be traumatic for them. When I continued to decline, Patricia got angry and accused me of being selfish and heartless. She said that I was abandoning a single mother in need and that my refusal to help could jeopardize her employment. She told me that good neighbours were supposed to support each other during difficult times and that my unwillingness to babysit showed I didn't care about the well-being of children in our building. I tried to explain that wanting to help and being able to provide regular childcare were two different things. I said that I had my own responsibilities and couldn't commit to being available whenever she needed someone to watch her kids. Patricia then suggested that we could work out a schedule where I'd watch the kids on certain evenings each week. She said that having a predictable arrangement would help both of us plan better. When I said I wasn't interested in a regular babysitting schedule, Patricia accused me of leading her on by helping out occasionally in the past. She said that I'd made her think she could count on me for support. The conversation was getting increasingly uncomfortable, and I could see that we weren't going to reach any kind of resolution. I told Patricia that I hoped she'd find a good childcare solution, but that it couldn't involve me taking on ongoing responsibilities. Patricia stormed off, but the demands didn't stop there. Over the next few days, she kept leaving notes under my door asking me to reconsider. She'd detail her work schedule and explain how much she needed help on specific days. She also started having her kids ask me directly if I could watch them. The children would knock on my door and say that their mum had told them to ask if they could come over while she went to work. I felt terrible turning away the kids, but I knew that Patricia was using them to manipulate me into agreeing to babysit. I started having to explain to 8-year-old children that I couldn't watch them because their mum and I had disagreed about childcare arrangements. The situation escalated when Patricia started telling other neighbours that I had agreed to babysit and then backed out at the last minute, leaving her scrambling for childcare. She painted me as unreliable and inconsiderate to other tenants in the building. I had to set the record straight with several neighbours who asked me about the situation. I explained that I'd never agreed to be Patricia's regular babysitter and that she'd been pressuring me to take on responsibilities I hadn't consented to. Eventually, Patricia found alternative childcare arrangements through a local program for single parents. The pressure stopped, but our relationship remained strained and awkward. Looking back, I realised that Patricia had gradually escalated her requests to see how much free labour she could get from me. What started as occasional emergency help had turned into an expectation of regular unpaid childcare services. The experience taught me the importance of setting clear boundaries early, even when you want to help someone who's struggling. Patricia's assumption that my availability meant obligation was a lesson in how quickly helpful neighbours can become taken advantage of. That story is over. This woman really thought that living in the same building created an automatic childcare contract. The way she gradually escalated from emergency help to regular overnight babysitting shows how manipulative the whole thing was. Using her own kids as guilt weapons while telling neighbours that the person she was harassing had somehow wronged her is particularly gross. Sometimes being a good neighbour means knowing when to say no. This next story comes from someone who learned that graduation day isn't safe from entitled parents. Entitled, "Mom tried to take my graduation cap." I graduated from college last month, and like most students, I spent weeks decorating my graduation cap. I'm an art major, so I went all out with intricate designs, hand-painted details, and even some small LED lights that spelled out my major. It took me probably 40 hours total, but I was really proud of how it turned out. The day of graduation, I was waiting in the staging area with all the other students before the ceremony began. I had my cap sitting on the table next to me while I adjusted my gown and took some photos with friends. That's when this woman approached me. She wasn't wearing graduation attire, so she was clearly a parent or family member who had wandered into the staging area. She walked right up to me and said, "Excuse me, my daughter forgot to decorate her cap, and yours is absolutely perfect. She would love to wear it for the ceremony." I was completely taken aback and told her that I had made the cap myself and would be wearing it for my own graduation. The woman's expression immediately changed, and she got this indignant look on her face. She said, "Well, my daughter is graduating summa cum laude, and she deserves to have a beautiful cap for her photos. You can just wear a plain one. It's not like anyone will notice." I explained again that this was my cap that I had spent weeks making, and that I would definitely be wearing it for my own graduation ceremony. That's when things got really weird. The woman actually reached over and grabbed my cap off the table. She said, "My daughter needs this more than you do. She's worked so hard for this moment, and she should look her best." I immediately stood up and grabbed the other side of my cap, and we literally had a brief tug of war over it right there in the staging area. Other students started staring and a few came over to help me. One of them told the woman she needed to leave the staging area immediately, since it was for graduates only. The woman finally let go of my cap, but not before saying, "Some people are just selfish. My daughter would have worn it better anyway." A security guard eventually escorted her out, but not before she shouted back that I was ruining her daughter's special day. I spent the rest of the pre-ceremony time checking my cap for damage, and couldn't believe someone had actually tried to steal it right off the table. The worst part is that I later saw her daughter during the ceremony, and she was wearing a perfectly nice, decorated cap. So either the mum was lying about her daughter forgetting to make one, or she just thought mine was better and decided her kid deserved it instead. I managed to walk across the stage with my cap intact, but the whole experience really put a damper on what should have been one of the best days of my life. I still can't believe a grown adult thought she could just take someone else's graduation cap because her daughter deserved it more. That story is absolutely insane. Imagine having the nerve to physically wrestle someone for their graduation cap while claiming your child deserves it more. The fact that this woman wandered into a restricted area and then tried to steal someone's artwork is just beyond comprehension. At least the other students had this person's back, but what a way to almost ruin someone's graduation day. Let's move on to our next story about a chess game that got way more intense than it needed to. The dad who demanded I let his kid win. My name is Jacob, and I volunteer at the local library helping with their weekend chess program for kids. I'm pretty decent at chess, been playing for about 15 years, and I really enjoy teaching children the basics of the game and strategy. Last Saturday, we had our usual chess tournament for kids aged 8 to 12. There was this one kid, maybe 9 years old, who seemed really eager to play against me instead of the other children. His dad was sitting nearby watching, so I figured it would be fine to play a casual game with the boy. The kid was actually pretty good for his age. He understood the basic moves and had clearly been practicing. But after about 10 minutes, it became obvious that I was going to win the game. I wasn't being aggressive or trying to crush him, just playing normally and letting him think through his moves. That's when his dad started getting involved. At first, he was just giving his son little hints like, think about that move or look at your queen. I didn't mind because it was supposed to be educational. But then the hints became more direct, like, move your bishop or take his knight. When it became clear that even with the coaching, his son was still going to lose, the dad stood up and walked over to our table. He leaned down and said quietly, "Hey, you should let him win this one. He's been practicing really hard, and it would mean a lot to him." I politely explained that part of learning chess is understanding that you don't always win, and that losing games helps you improve. The dad didn't like that answer. He said, "Come on, he's just a kid. What's it going to hurt to let him have this victory?" I told him I thought it was more valuable for children to earn their wins, but that I'd be happy to play another game afterward and give his son some tips on strategy. The dad's face started turning red, and he raised his voice enough that other people in the library started looking over. He said, "You're being ridiculous. He's 9 years old and you're a grown man. Just let him win the stupid game." At this point, his son was looking embarrassed, and other parents were starting to stare. I tried to keep my voice calm and suggested we could reset the board and play a teaching game where I explained my moves. But the dad was having none of it. He actually reached over and started moving his son's pieces on the board, saying, "There, now he's winning. Are you happy?" I explained that wasn't how chess worked, and that manipulating the board wasn't going to help his son learn anything. The dad completely lost it and started yelling about how I was being unfair to children, and that adults should always let kids win at games. He said I was probably the kind of person who would beat a child at checkers or steal candy from babies. The librarian had to come over and ask him to lower his voice. His poor son was mortified and kept saying, "Dad, it's okay, I don't mind losing." But the dad kept going, insisting that I was being cruel and that his son deserved to win because he had been practicing. Finally, the head librarian came over and asked the dad to leave if he couldn't behave appropriately. The dad grabbed his son and stormed out, but not before loudly announcing that this was exactly what was wrong with society and that people like me were destroying children's self-esteem. The kid looked back at me apologetically as they left, and I felt terrible that what should have been a fun learning experience had turned into such a scene. Several other parents came over afterward to say they thought the dad was completely out of line and that I had handled it well. I've been thinking about it all week, and I still can't understand why that dad thought teaching his son that adults should just let him win was a good lesson. Chess is literally about strategy and improving through practice and losses. The entitlement of demanding someone throw a chess game because your kid deserves to win is just staggering. That poor child was probably learning more about good sportsmanship than his father ever taught him. Some parents are so obsessed with protecting their kids from any disappointment that they end up teaching them the world owes them success. Jacob handled that situation with way more patience than most people would have. Our next story involves someone who got a very unexpected visit from their neighbour's mother, entitled "Parent Wanted Me to Switch Apartments." I live in a really nice apartment complex downtown. It's one of those newer buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows and city views. I'm on the 8th floor, and my unit faces east, so I get amazing sunrise views and can see the river and the downtown skyline. I've been living here for about 2 years and absolutely love it. The rent isn't cheap, but the location and views make it worth it for me. My neighbour across the hall is this guy in his early 20s who seems nice enough. We've chatted a few times in the hallway, nothing major, just typical neighbour small talk. Last week I was coming home from work around 6 in the evening when I saw an older woman standing outside my neighbour's door. She was probably in her 50s, well dressed, and was knocking pretty aggressively. When she saw me coming down the hall, she immediately walked over to me. She introduced herself as my neighbour's mother and said she was visiting from out of town. Then she said, "I've been looking at the apartments here, and I noticed you have the better unit. My son should really have the view that you have." I was confused and asked what she meant. She explained that she'd been inside my neighbour's apartment and noticed that his windows faced the courtyard and parking area, while mine faced the city. She said it wasn't fair that someone so young, referring to me, had gotten the premium unit when her son had been looking for apartments first. I told her that I had toured multiple units when I was apartment hunting and had specifically chosen this one because of the view, and that I paid extra rent for it. She said that didn't matter because her son needed the better apartment more than I did. She actually asked me if I would be willing to switch apartments with her son. She said it would be a simple matter of just trading keys and that she was sure the landlord would understand. I explained that wasn't how rental agreements worked and that I had no interest in switching apartments. The woman got more insistent and said her son was just starting his career and that having the nicer apartment would help him feel more successful and confident. She said I looked like I was already established in life and probably wouldn't even notice the difference in views. I told her again that I wasn't interested in switching and that I loved my apartment exactly as it was. She then offered to pay me to switch, saying she'd give me $500 to trade apartments with her son. When I declined that offer too, she got visibly frustrated. She said I was being selfish and that young people should help each other out. She claimed that her son had mentioned he was jealous of my view and that it was affecting his mood living across the hall from something better that he couldn't have. At this point, I told her I needed to go inside and that this conversation was over. But as I was unlocking my door, she followed me and actually tried to look inside my apartment. She said, "I just want to see what it looks like so I can tell my son what he's missing." I quickly closed the door behind me, but I could hear her in the hallway for another few minutes, apparently calling her son and talking loudly about how unreasonable I was being. The next day, I got a text from my neighbour apologising for his mother's behaviour. He said she had surprised him with a visit and that he had no idea she was going to approach me about switching apartments. He seemed genuinely embarrassed and assured me he had never complained to her about his apartment or expressed any jealousy about mine. He said his mother had a tendency to get overly involved in his life and that he had told her to drop the whole apartment situation. I appreciated his apology, but the whole thing was just so bizarre. I still can't believe someone would show up at a stranger's apartment and demand they switch homes because their adult child deserved the better view. The sheer boldness of showing up at someone's door and demanding they trade apartments is absolutely wild. This woman really thought she could just rearrange her son's living situation by bullying his neighbour into swapping units. The fact that she offered money shows she knew what she was asking was ridiculous, but somehow still thought it was reasonable. At least the son had the decency to apologise for his mother's insane behaviour. Let's dive into our next story about a pharmacy encounter that got way more dramatic than anyone expected. The mum who demanded my spot in line. My name is Kelly, and I have a chronic condition that requires me to pick up prescription medication every month. Last Tuesday, I went to my usual pharmacy after work to get my refill. It was around 5:30, so it was pretty busy with people stopping by after their workday. I got my number from the machine and saw that there were about 6 people ahead of me. No big deal, I had my phone and a book, so I settled in to wait. The pharmacist had told the person at the counter that they were running about 10 minutes behind schedule due to a computer issue earlier in the day. I had been waiting for maybe 15 minutes when this woman walked in with a kid who looked to be about 7 years old. The child was bouncing around and seemed energetic but not sick or anything. The woman looked at the number display and saw that they would be waiting for a while. She walked directly over to me and said, "Excuse me, I need to get my son's medication and he can't wait in this line. Would you mind if we went ahead of you?" I looked at her kid, who was now playing a game on his mum's phone and seemed perfectly fine waiting. I politely said that I had been waiting for 20 minutes already and that I also needed to pick up important medication. She immediately got defensive and said, "My child is 7 years old. Children shouldn't have to wait in long lines for medicine." I explained that I understood waiting with kids could be challenging, but that the line was first come, first served, and I had been there first. She said, "Adults can handle waiting better than children. You should let families with kids go first." The thing is, her son wasn't even complaining about waiting. He was sitting quietly in one of the chairs playing on the phone. But the mum kept insisting that children had priority in medical situations. She said it was common courtesy to let families with kids skip ahead in lines. I stood my ground and said I would keep my place in line. That's when she got really pushy. She said, "Fine, but when my son starts having a meltdown because he's tired of waiting, that's on you." She then positioned herself and her child directly in front of me, in line, essentially cutting. I tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, I was here first." She turned around and loudly said, "My child needs his medication and can't wait as long as adults can. Stop being selfish." Other people in line started looking over, and an elderly man behind me actually spoke up and said he had seen me there first. The woman got even more agitated and said that people without children just didn't understand how hard it was to manage kids in public. She kept her position in front of me, and when her number was called, she went up to the counter. I couldn't believe she had actually cut in line and was now getting served ahead of me. The pharmacist didn't know there had been an issue, so they just processed her prescription normally. While she was at the counter, the elderly man who had defended me went up to the pharmacist and quietly explained what had happened. The pharmacist looked over at me and nodded, then called me up right after the woman was finished, ahead of the next number that should have been called. As the woman was leaving with her son's prescription, she walked past me and said, "Next time, think about children first instead of being so selfish." Her son didn't even seem to understand what had happened and was still happily playing on the phone. The whole thing probably added maybe 3 minutes to her wait time, but she acted like I was torturing her child by not giving up my spot in line. I've been thinking about it all week, and I still can't understand why she thought having a kid automatically meant she could cut in front of people who had been waiting longer. The manipulation of using her kid as an excuse to cut in line is just incredible. The child was perfectly content waiting, but she weaponized his age to try to skip ahead of everyone else. The fact that she had the nerve to call someone selfish while literally cutting in line shows the level of mental gymnastics some parents will do to justify their behaviour. Thank goodness for that elderly man who spoke up. Here's our next story about a grocery shopping experience that took an absolutely bizarre turn. Entitled "Parent Tried to Take My Shopping Cart." I was doing my weekly grocery shopping last Sunday at the big supermarket near my house. I had spent about an hour going through the store and had a pretty full cart. I'm someone who meal preps for the week and buys ingredients in bulk, so my cart had quite a bit of stuff in it. I was in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between a couple of different brands, when I felt someone bump into my cart from behind. I turned around and saw this woman with 2 kids, probably around 5 and 8 years old. She had grabbed onto the handle of my shopping cart and was trying to pull it toward her. I said, "Excuse me, that's my cart," and tried to pull it back. She looked at me and said, "You have way too much stuff in here. You don't need all of this." I was completely confused and asked what she meant. She said, "I have 2 children to feed and you're just shopping for yourself. You should share some of these groceries." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her these were my groceries that I had selected and paid for, and that she needed to get her own cart. She said, "Look at how much food you have. My kids are hungry and you're being greedy." She actually started taking items out of my cart. She grabbed a box of granola bars and handed it to one of her children, saying, "Here, honey, this nice person is sharing with us." I immediately took the box back and put it in my cart. I told her she couldn't take things from my cart and that she needed to stop. She said, "I'm a single mother and it's hard to afford groceries for growing children. You should be more understanding." The woman kept reaching into my cart and taking items. She took a package of chicken breasts and said, "My kids need protein more than you do." When I took it back, she said, I was being selfish and that people without children didn't understand how expensive it was to feed a family. Her kids seemed embarrassed by what their mum was doing. The older one actually said, Mum, we can't take other people's food, but she shushed him and said, sometimes adults need to help families in need. I started pushing my cart away from her, but she followed me and kept trying to take things. She grabbed a bag of apples and said, children need fresh fruit. You can buy fruit any time, but my kids need it now. At this point, I was getting really frustrated and told her I was going to call store security if she didn't stop taking my groceries. She said, go ahead. They'll understand that a mother is just trying to feed her children. I flagged down a store employee who was stocking shelves nearby. I explained that this woman was taking items out of my cart without permission. The employee looked confused and asked the woman what was going on. She said, this person has more groceries than they could possibly need, and my children are hungry. I was just asking them to share some of their food with us. The store employee explained that customers couldn't take items from other people's carts and that she would need to select her own groceries. The woman got indignant and said, this is exactly what's wrong with society. People are so selfish, they won't even help children who need food. She stormed off with her kids, muttering loudly about how heartless people were. The store employee apologized to me and asked if I wanted security to keep an eye on the situation. I said that probably wasn't necessary since she had left, but I couldn't believe someone had actually tried to take groceries directly out of my cart. I finished my shopping pretty quickly after that, but I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't following me around the store. The whole experience was just surreal. I've never had anyone try to take my groceries before, especially while claiming their children deserved them more than I did. The entitlement of reaching into someone else's shopping cart and taking their food is just mind-blowing. Using her kids as justification for essentially stealing groceries shows how far some parents will go to get what they want. The fact that her own children seemed embarrassed suggests they knew their mother's behaviour was wrong, but she just kept doubling down on the manipulation. Let's move on to a story about someone who came home to find quite the surprise in their backyard. The neighbour who said her kid deserved my pool. My name is Sarah and I own a house with a decent-sized backyard pool. It's nothing fancy, just a basic above-ground pool that I had installed last summer. I work from home most days and I love being able to take a quick swim during my lunch break or relax by the pool after work. My next-door neighbours moved in about 6 months ago. They have 3 kids ranging from maybe 6 to 12 years old. The kids seem nice enough when I see them in the yard, and the parents have been polite during our brief conversations over the fence. Last Thursday, I was working from home and had a particularly stressful morning with back-to-back video calls. Around noon, I decided to take a break and go for a swim to clear my head. I changed into my swimsuit, grabbed a towel, and headed out to the backyard. When I opened the sliding door, I was shocked to see all 3 of my neighbours' kids splashing around in my pool. They had apparently climbed over the fence and just made themselves at home. I stood there for a moment trying to process what I was seeing. I called out to them and asked what they were doing in my pool. The oldest kid looked up and said, "Oh, hi, we're just swimming. The water's really nice today." I told them they needed to get out immediately because this was my private pool and they didn't have permission to use it. The kids seemed confused but started getting out of the water. That's when their mother appeared at the fence line. She had apparently been watching from her yard the whole time. She said, "Is there a problem here?" I explained that her children had been swimming in my pool without permission and that they needed to stay in their own yard. She looked at me like I was being ridiculous and said, "They're just kids having fun. What's the big deal?" I told her the big deal was that this was my private property and my pool, and that her children couldn't just use it whenever they felt like it. She said, "You're not even using it right now. It's just sitting there empty." I explained that whether I was using it or not wasn't the point, and that she should have asked permission before letting her kids swim in my pool. She said, "I didn't think you'd mind. Kids need to have fun in the summer, and we don't have a pool." I told her I understood that, but that didn't give them the right to use mine without asking. She said, Look, you live alone, and you have this big pool that's empty most of the time. My kids would get so much more use out of it than you do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her that was completely irrelevant and that the pool belonged to me. She said, "You're being really selfish. These are just innocent children who want to cool off on a hot day." She then suggested that we work out some kind of arrangement where her kids could use the pool when I wasn't home. She said it would be a shame to let such a nice pool go to waste when there were children right next door who would appreciate it. I told her absolutely not, and that her children were not allowed in my yard or my pool under any circumstances. She said, "Fine, but you should know that you're disappointing 3 little kids who just wanted to have some summer fun." As she was walking away, she turned back and said, "I hope you can sleep at night, knowing you're denying children the simple joy of swimming." Her kids looked embarrassed as they followed her back to their own yard. I immediately went inside and called my insurance company to ask about liability issues if neighbourhood kids were using my pool without permission. They told me it could be a huge problem if someone got hurt and recommended I install a lock on my gate and put up no trespassing signs. I spent the rest of the afternoon installing a better lock on my fence gate and posting signs about private property. I also set up a security camera pointed at the pool area just in case they tried to sneak over again. The next day, I saw the mum in her backyard, and she gave me the coldest stare. She's been giving me dirty looks ever since, and I've heard her talking loudly to other neighbours about how some people are just too selfish to share with children. I can't believe she thought it was reasonable to let her kids use my pool without asking, and then tried to make me feel guilty for not wanting strange children swimming in my backyard when I'm not even home. That story's absolutely wild. The fact that she was watching her kids swim in someone else's pool and thought that was totally normal behaviour is just beyond me. Then she had the nerve to try to negotiate regular pool access like it was some kind of community resource. The manipulation of making it about innocent children while completely ignoring basic property rights is textbook entitled parent behaviour. At least Sarah had the sense to install security measures, because those kids would have been back. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that even graduation tickets aren't safe from family entitlement. Entitled "Mom Wanted My Graduation Tickets." My name is Darren, and I just graduated from medical school last month. It was a huge milestone for me, since I'm the first person in my family to become a doctor. The ceremony was being held at a large auditorium, but they still had to limit tickets due to space constraints. Each graduate got 4 tickets for family members. I had planned to give my tickets to my parents, my girlfriend, and my younger sister, who had been really supportive throughout medical school. It seemed like a perfect group of people who had been there for me during the hardest years of my life. About a week before graduation, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. She's my dad's sister, and we've never been particularly close, but we see each other at family gatherings and get along fine. She congratulated me on graduating and said how proud the whole family was of my achievement. Then she said, "I was wondering if I could get a couple of your graduation tickets. I'd love to bring my 2 boys to see the ceremony." Her sons are my cousins, ages 16 and 14, and while they're good kids, we're not especially close either. I told her I'd already planned to give my 4 tickets to my parents, girlfriend, and sister. She said, "Oh, come on, you can't spare 2 tickets for family? This would be such a great experience for my boys." I explained that I only had 4 tickets total, and they were already spoken for. She said, "Well, surely your girlfriend doesn't need to be there. This is a family event. You could give those tickets to your cousins instead." I was taken aback and told her that my girlfriend had been incredibly supportive during medical school and absolutely deserved to be there. Aunt Linda said, "She's not even family. My boys are your blood relatives, and they should get priority." I tried to explain that I had already made my decision about who would attend, but she kept pushing. She said, "Think about what a great example this would set for the boys. They could see what success looks like, and maybe it would motivate them to work harder in school." She then suggested I asked my parents to give up their tickets so her sons could attend instead. She said, "Your parents can be proud of you from home. The boys need to see this ceremony to understand the importance of education." I told her that was absolutely not happening and that my parents wouldn't miss my graduation for anything. She said, "You're being really selfish, Darren. This is about more than just you. This is about inspiring the next generation of our family." She kept calling over the next few days, each time with a new argument about why her sons deserved the tickets more than the people I had chosen. She said my sister was too young to appreciate the significance of the ceremony and that my girlfriend could watch it online later. Finally, she called and said she had talked to my dad and that he had agreed to give up his ticket so one of her sons could attend. I immediately called my dad, who said he had never agreed to any such thing and that Aunt Linda had been pressuring him all week. The day before graduation, she showed up at my parents' house, unannounced, with both of her sons. She said, "We're here for the graduation tomorrow. I figured you'd come to your senses about the tickets." I had to tell her again that she and her sons were not invited to my graduation and that all 4 tickets were already distributed. She said, "Fine, but you should know that you're crushing these boys' dreams of seeing their successful cousin graduate." She made a huge scene in front of her kids, saying I was selfish and didn't care about family. Her sons looked mortified and kept saying it was okay, that they didn't need to come. But she kept going on about how disappointed they were and how this was a missed opportunity for them to be inspired. My graduation went perfectly with the 4 people I had chosen to be there, but I found out later that Aunt Linda had called several other family members to complain about how I had excluded her children from my special day. She told people I had extra tickets that I was wasting just to hurt her family. The whole experience really put a damper on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I still can't believe she thought she could guilt me into giving up tickets that were meant for my closest supporters. The manipulation of trying to pit family members against each other over graduation tickets is just incredible. Aunt Linda really thought she could pressure Darren's dad into giving up his seat and then just show up expecting to attend. The way she used her own kids as emotional weapons while they clearly didn't even want to be part of the drama is particularly cruel. Some people will weaponize any situation to get what they want, even their own child's education. Let's dive into our next story about a college student who learned that study materials aren't immune to parental entitlement. The parent who demanded my teacher notes. I'm a junior at a pretty competitive university, majoring in biochemistry. I'm one of those students who takes really detailed notes during lectures and spends a lot of time organising them afterward. I use different coloured pens, make charts and diagrams, and basically turn my notebooks into comprehensive study guides. There's this girl in my organic chemistry class named Ashley, who sits near me. We've talked a few times and she seems nice enough, but we're not really friends or study partners. She's mentioned that she struggles with the class and finds the professor's lectures hard to follow. Last week, Ashley approached me after class and asked if she could borrow my notes from the last few lectures. She said she had missed some classes due to being sick and wanted to catch up. I told her that was fine and made copies of the relevant pages for her. A few days later, Ashley's mum called me. I have no idea how she got my phone number, but she introduced herself and said Ashley had told her how helpful my notes were. She thanked me for helping her daughter and said she could tell I was a very dedicated student. Then she said, "Ashley mentioned that your notes are much better than what she's been taking in class. Would it be possible for you to share all of your notes with her for the rest of the semester?" I was a bit surprised and told her that I had already helped Ashley catch up on the classes she missed. The mum said, "Yes, but your notes are so much more detailed and organised than what Ashley can manage on her own. She really needs this help to succeed in the class." I explained that taking good notes was a skill I had developed over years of practice, and that Ashley should work on improving her own note-taking abilities. She said, "Look, I know you're a good student and this comes naturally to you, but Ashley is struggling and she needs all the help she can get." her grades in this class could affect her chances of getting into graduate school. I told her I understood that organic chemistry was challenging, but that sharing my notes for the entire semester wouldn't really help Ashley learn the material. She said, "That's not your decision to make. You're not her teacher. You're just a student who happens to be good at taking notes." The conversation got more intense when she said, "I'm paying a lot of money for Ashley's education, and if there are students in her classes who could help her succeed, then they should. This is about her future." I tried to explain that my notes were the result of my own taking hard work and study time, and that simply copying them wouldn't help Ashley understand the concepts. The mum said, "You're being selfish. You already understand the material, so what harm would it do to share your notes with someone who needs them more?" She then offered to pay me for my notes. She said, "I'll give you $50 for copies of all your notes from this semester, plus $20 for each new set of notes you take." I told her I wasn't interested in selling my study materials, and that this whole conversation was inappropriate. The mum got frustrated and said, "Fine, but you should think about whether you want to be the kind of person who hoards knowledge when you could be helping a fellow student succeed." She hung up after that, but the next day Ashley approached me in class. Ashley seemed embarrassed and said, "My mum called you, didn't she? I'm so sorry about that. I never asked her to do that." She explained that she had mentioned to her parents that my notes were really helpful, and her mum had decided to take matters into her own hands. I told Ashley it was okay and that I understood her mum was just trying to help, but then Ashley said, "She's been pressuring me to ask you for more notes, and now she wants me to sit next to you in every class so I can copy everything you write down." I felt bad for Ashley because she was clearly caught in the middle of her mum's overbearing behaviour, but I also knew that if I gave in to these demands, it would set a bad precedent and probably wouldn't actually help Ashley learn the material any better. I told Ashley I'd be happy to study together sometimes or explain concepts she didn't understand, but that I couldn't just hand over all of my notes for the semester. She seemed to understand and said she would tell her mum that I had already been helpful enough, but her mum wasn't done. She started showing up to wait for Ashley after our chemistry class. She would watch me pack up my notes and make comments about how detailed and organised they were. She said things like, "Those notes could really make the difference in Ashley's grade." Finally, I had to talk to my professor about the situation. He said he'd dealt with similar issues before, and that parents sometimes got inappropriately involved in their adult children's academic work. He assured me that I had no obligation to share my notes with other students, especially when being pressured by parents. The whole situation made me uncomfortable for the rest of the semester. I felt like I was being watched and judged every time I took notes in class, and Ashley's mum would give me guilt trip looks whenever she saw me. The entitlement of expecting another student to basically do your child's academic work for them is absolutely staggering. This mum really thought she could purchase someone else's hard work and effort, like it was just another service she could buy for her daughter. The fact that she was stalking this poor student after class shows how far some parents will go when they can't accept that their child needs to do their own work. At least Ashley seemed embarrassed by her mother's behaviour, but imagine the pressure she must have felt. Our next story comes from someone who learned that even gaming consoles aren't safe from entitled parents. Entitled, "Dad wanted my PS5 for his son." My name is Marcus, and I work at a tech company downtown. I'm 28 years old, and I've been gaming since I was a kid. Last year, I finally managed to get my hands on a PlayStation 5 after months of trying to find one in stock. Anyone who's tried to buy a PS5 knows how difficult they were to get, especially during the shortages. I work with this guy named Derek, who's about my age. We're not close friends or anything, but we chat occasionally about work stuff and sometimes grab lunch together. Derek has mentioned that his 10-year-old son is really into gaming and has been wanting a PS5 for ages. Last month, our company had a casual Friday where people could bring family members to the office for a little tour and lunch. Derek brought his dad, who seemed like a nice enough older gentleman, probably in his 60s. We were all eating in the break room when somehow the conversation turned to hobbies and interests. I mentioned that I'd been playing a lot of the new Spider-Man game on my PlayStation 5, and Derek's dad's ears perked up immediately. He asked me about the console and seemed really interested in hearing about the games and features. I thought he might be considering buying one for Derek's son. Then Derek's dad said something that caught me off guard. He said, "You know, Marcus, you're getting to an age where you should probably be focusing on more adult things than video games." I laughed it off and said gaming was just a fun way to unwind after work, but he kept going. He said, "A man your age should be thinking about marriage, starting a family, building a career. Video games are really more for children." I tried to stay polite and explained that lots of adults enjoy gaming as a hobby, just like watching sports or reading books. That's when he dropped the bombshell. He said, "Well, since you're outgrowing video games anyway, maybe you'd consider letting Derek's son have your PlayStation. He's at the perfect age to really appreciate it, and it would mean the world to him." I was stunned. I told him that I actually really enjoyed my PS5 and had no plans to get rid of it. He seemed surprised by my response and said, "Come on, Marcus, be reasonable. You're almost 30 years old. Don't you think it's time to put childish things aside?" Derek looked mortified and tried to change the subject, but his dad wasn't done. He said, "I'm sure you paid good money for that game system, but think about how much joy it could bring to a young boy who would really use it properly." I explained that I used it plenty and that it wasn't something I was looking to give away. Derek's dad said, "Look, I'm not asking you to just give it away. I'd be happy to pay you something for it. Maybe $100? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. PS5s were selling for way more than retail price at the time, and he was offering me $100 for a console that cost $500 new. I told him that wasn't even close to what it was worth. He said, "Well, you probably got it for free somehow, or you're not really using it that much anyway. $100 is fair for something you don't really need." Derek was trying to signal to his dad to drop the subject, but the man was determined. He then tried a different approach. He said, "Marcus, I can tell you're a good person. Derek's son has been saving his allowance for months, trying to buy one of these game systems, but they're impossible to find. You could be the hero who makes his dream come true." I felt bad for the kid, but I also wasn't about to give up something I'd worked hard to get and really enjoyed using. I told Derek's dad that I hoped his grandson would be able to find a PS5 soon, but that mine wasn't available. He got a bit pushy after that. He said, "You know, Derek tells me you make good money at this job. You could easily buy another one if you really wanted to. This would just be a nice gesture to help out a family." I pointed out that if it was so easy to buy another one, then they could buy one for Derek's son themselves. Derek's dad said, "That's not the point. The point is that you have one right now that a child could be enjoying instead of it just sitting there while you pretend to be a teenager." Derek finally stepped in and told his dad to drop it, but the damage was done. The rest of lunch was incredibly awkward, and I could tell Derek was embarrassed by his father's behaviour. After they left, Derek came to my desk and apologised profusely. He said his dad could be really pushy and that he had no idea he was going to ask me about my PlayStation. He assured me that he had never suggested his father should ask me for it, but the story doesn't end there. 2 days later, Derek's dad called the office and asked to speak with me directly. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and wanted to make a better offer. He said he'd give me $200 for the PS5, plus he'd throw in some old sports equipment from his garage. I told him again that I wasn't interested in selling my PlayStation at any price. He said, "Marcus, I think you're being unreasonable. $200 is a lot of money for a toy that you barely use." He then tried to guilt-trip me by saying Derek's son had been asking about the PS5 every day since hearing that someone at his dad's work had one. He said, "That little boy goes to sleep every night dreaming about playing those games, and you could make it happen with one simple decision." I felt terrible for the kid, but I also knew that giving in to this pressure would just be enabling the grandfather's inappropriate behaviour. I told him one final time that my PlayStation wasn't for sale and asked him not to contact me about it again. Derek apologised again the next day and said he'd talk to his dad about backing off. He seemed genuinely embarrassed about the whole situation, and assured me it wouldn't happen again. The grandfather never contacted me directly after that. But Derek mentioned a few weeks later that his dad was still occasionally bringing up how selfish I was for hoarding a game system that a child could be enjoying. Apparently, he'd been telling other family members about how adults these days don't know how to prioritize properly. I still have my PS5 and I still enjoy playing games on it after work, but the whole experience made me realize how some people think they can just decide what's appropriate for other adults and then use guilt and manipulation to get what they want. That story is just incredible. The sheer nerve of telling a grown adult that they're too old for their own hobbies and should hand over expensive electronics to children is beyond me. This grandfather really thought he could shame someone into giving away a $500 console for a fraction of its value because adults should know better. The manipulation tactics and guilt tripping about the poor child dreaming of video games while calling Marcus selfish for keeping his own property is textbook entitled Behaviour. Let's move into our next story about someone who got an unexpected babysitting assignment in the most bizarre way possible. The mom who told me to babysit in the park. I was spending a quiet Saturday afternoon at the local park, just sitting on a bench reading a book and enjoying the nice weather. It's one of those larger parks with playgrounds, walking trails, and plenty of open space. I go there fairly often when I want to get out of my apartment and relax somewhere peaceful. I had been there for maybe 30 minutes when this woman approached me with two young children, probably around 4 and 6 years old. She walked right up to my bench and said, "Perfect, you look responsible. You'll watch them, right?" Before I could even respond, she was already walking away. I called after her and said, "Excuse me, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I don't know you or your children." She turned back and said, "Oh, don't worry, they're really good kids. I'll be back in an hour." I stood up and told her she couldn't just leave her children with a stranger. She said, "Look, I have an important appointment and my babysitter cancelled last minute. You're just sitting here anyway, so what's the big deal?" I explained that I was a complete stranger and that leaving her kids with me was dangerous and inappropriate. She said, "You seem nice enough. Besides, there are plenty of people around, so it's not like anything bad could happen." The two children were standing there looking confused while their mother and I had this surreal conversation. I told her again that I absolutely could not watch her children and that she needed to take them with her or find proper childcare. She got frustrated and said, "Come on, I'm desperate here. I've been looking for someone to watch them for 20 minutes. You're obviously not doing anything important." She gestured at my book like reading was somehow proof that I had nothing better to do. I told her that whether I was busy or not wasn't relevant, and that she couldn't leave her children with random people in parks. She said, "Fine, but if you change your mind, I'll be back around 3 o'clock. They like goldfish crackers and juice boxes." She actually started walking away again, leaving her two young children standing next to my bench. I had to call after her and say, "You cannot leave these children here with me. I am not agreeing to watch them." She came back looking annoyed and said, "What am I supposed to do then? I can't take them to my appointment and I can't afford to miss it." I suggested she call a family member, friend, or professional babysitter. She said, "I already tried all of that. You're my last option. Just watch them for 1 hour. What could possibly go wrong in 1 hour at a public park?" I explained that a million things could go wrong and that I wasn't qualified or willing to be responsible for someone else's children. She said, "You don't need qualifications to sit on a bench while kids play on the playground." The whole situation was getting more bizarre by the minute. I told her that if she left her children with me, I would immediately call the police and report them as abandoned. She said, "That seems like an overreaction. I'm not abandoning them. I'm just asking for a small favour." I said it wasn't a small favour to ask a stranger to be responsible for the safety and well-being of two young children. She said, "Look, you seem like a responsible adult. I'm sure you can handle watching two well-behaved kids for an hour." At this point, I started walking away from the situation. I told her I was leaving and that she needed to take her children with her. She followed me and said, Wait, where are you going? You can't just leave when I need help. I told her I absolutely could leave since I had no obligation to help her with her childcare problems. She said, "That's really selfish. I'm just a mum trying to handle an emergency situation." I pointed out that her poor planning didn't constitute an emergency for me, and that leaving children with strangers was dangerous regardless of her circumstances. She said, "Fine, but I hope you can sleep at night knowing you refuse to help a mother in need." She finally gathered up her children and left, but not before making several more comments about how unhelpful and selfish people had become. The kids looked embarrassed and confused by their mother's behaviour throughout the entire interaction. I couldn't concentrate on my book after that, and ended up leaving the park early. The whole experience was so strange and uncomfortable. I kept thinking about what would have happened if she had actually managed to leave those children with someone who agreed to watch them without knowing anything about them or their family. I also couldn't stop wondering if this was something she did regularly, just approaching random people in public places and asking them to watch her kids. The casual way she handled the whole situation made it seem like this wasn't her first time trying something like this. The whole thing made me realize how some parents will try to make their problems everyone else's responsibility, and how they'll use guilt and manipulation when people refuse to enable their poor choices. That story left me completely speechless. The casual way this woman approached a total stranger and tried to dump her children on them like it was the most normal thing in the world is terrifying. The fact that she kept insisting it was just a small favour while trying to abandon two young children with someone she'd never met shows a complete disconnect from reality. Those poor kids were probably so confused about why their mum was arguing with a stranger about leaving them behind. At least this person had the sense to refuse and threaten to call police, but imagine how many people might have just gone along with it. Our next story involves someone who learned that even graduation gowns can become objects of entitled parent desire. Entitled Parent Tried to Steal My Graduation Gown. My name is Lily, and I graduated from nursing school last spring. It was a huge accomplishment for me, since I'd worked full-time while going to school, and it took me 5 years to complete the programme. I was really looking forward to the graduation ceremony and had invited my whole family to attend. The week before graduation, we had to go to the campus bookstore to pick up our caps and gowns. The school had ordered enough for all the graduates, but you had to go during specific time windows to collect yours. I went on the designated day for students with last names starting with L through P. When I got to the bookstore, there was a decent line of other students waiting to pick up their graduation attire. The staff had everything organised by last name and were checking student IDs before handing out the gowns. It was all very orderly and efficient. I got my gown and cap, plus the special nursing school pin that we were supposed to wear during the ceremony. Everything looked perfect, and I was excited to try it on at home later. As I was leaving the bookstore, this woman approached me carrying what looked like graduation materials. She said, "Excuse me, are you picking up graduation stuff too?" I told her I had just got my gown and was heading home. She said, "Oh, good. Maybe you can help me with a problem I'm having." She explained that her daughter was also graduating from the nursing program, but that they had run out of gowns in her size when she went to pick hers up. She said the bookstore told her they would have more gowns available the next day, but that her daughter was really upset about the delay. I sympathised and said that sounded frustrating, but that I was sure they would get it sorted out quickly. She said, "Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. What size gown did you get?" I told her I'd gotten a medium, and her face lit up. She said, "Perfect. That's exactly what my daughter needs. Would you be willing to let her use your gown for the ceremony? You could pick up a replacement tomorrow when they restock." I was confused and told her that I needed my own gown for my own graduation. She said, "I understand that, but my daughter is really stressed about this whole situation. She's been looking forward to graduation for years, and now she might not have the right gown." I explained that I had also been looking forward to graduation and had worked just as hard to get there. She said, "Yes, but you have your gown already. My daughter doesn't have anything to wear for the ceremony." I told her that wasn't my fault and that she should work with the bookstore to resolve the issue. She said, "I tried that already. They said they can't guarantee when the new gowns will arrive, and graduation is in 3 days." She then said, "Look, you seem like a nice person. Surely you can understand how important this is for a student who's worked so hard to get to graduation day." I said I understood it was important, which was exactly why I couldn't give up my own gown. The woman got more insistent and said, "You're being really selfish about this. My daughter is devastated, and you could easily solve her problem." I told her I wasn't being selfish by wanting to wear my own graduation gown to my own graduation ceremony. She said, "Fine, but you should know that you're ruining a young woman's special day over something that doesn't really matter to you." I couldn't believe she was saying my graduation didn't matter to me. I started walking toward the parking lot, but she followed me. She said, "Wait, let me ask you this. How much did you pay for that gown?" I told her it was included in my graduation fees. She said, "So you didn't even pay extra for it?" My daughter's family has invested so much money in her education, and now she might not be able to graduate properly because of a supply issue. I pointed out that I had also invested money in my education and deserved to have my own graduation gown. She said, "But you could get another one tomorrow. My daughter can't wait until tomorrow." The conversation was getting ridiculous, so I told her I had to leave and wished her luck resolving the gown situation. As I was unlocking my car, she said, "I hope you're proud of yourself for being so selfish and inconsiderate." I got in my car and drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about the interaction. The woman had seemed genuinely angry that I wouldn't give up my graduation gown for her daughter, as if I was somehow obligated to solve their problem. 2 days later, I was at the campus coffee shop studying when I overheard a conversation at the next table. 2 students were talking about graduation preparations, and one mentioned that her mother had been calling the bookstore every day, demanding they find a gown for her daughter. I looked over and realised it was the same woman from the bookstore parking lot. She was sitting with a young woman who I assumed was her daughter. The daughter looked embarrassed and kept saying, "Mum, it's fine. The bookstore said they'll have more gowns tomorrow." But the mother was saying, "It's not fine. You deserve to have the perfect graduation day, and I'm not going to let supply issues ruin it for you." Then she said, "I even found a student who had an extra gown, but she refused to share it with you." I realised she was talking about me and was completely misrepresenting our conversation. I hadn't had an extra gown at all. I had exactly one gown that I needed for my own graduation. But she was telling her daughter that I had been hoarding graduation supplies. The daughter said, "Mom, please stop. You're making this whole thing more stressful than it needs to be. I'll get a gown tomorrow and everything will be fine." But her mother kept going on about how selfish other students were and how they didn't understand the importance of graduation day. I finished my coffee and left without saying anything, but I felt bad for the daughter who seemed mortified by her mother's behaviour. I also couldn't believe that the woman was still talking about our interaction 2 days later and had completely twisted the story to make herself look like the victim. My graduation ceremony went perfectly, and I was so proud to wear my nursing school pin and walk across the stage in my own gown. I hope the other student was able to get her gown situation sorted out, but I'm glad I didn't let her mother guilt me into giving up mine. The manipulation in that story is just staggering. This woman really tried to convince someone to give up their own graduation gown and then painted them as the villain for wanting to wear it to their own ceremony. The way she completely twisted the story later, claiming Lily had an extra gown when she only had the one she needed, shows how some people will rewrite reality to justify their entitled behaviour. That poor daughter seemed to understand how unreasonable her mother was being, but had to deal with the embarrassment of her mum harassing other students over something the bookstore could have easily resolved. Let's move to our next story, about a neighbour who thought noise ordinances didn't apply to their child's study schedule. The mum who demanded I stop practicing piano. I live in a townhouse complex where the units are pretty close together, but not exactly attached. I've been playing piano for about 15 years, and I'm actually pretty good at it. When I moved into my current place 2 years ago, one of the things I loved about it was that I could set up my digital piano in the living room and practice without bothering anyone too much. I'm very considerate about when I practice. I never play before 9 in the morning or after 8 at night, and I usually keep the volume at a reasonable level. I've never had any complaints from neighbours, and a few have even mentioned that they enjoy hearing me play sometimes. About 6 months ago, a new family moved in next door. They have a 12-year-old son who I've seen around the complex occasionally. He seems like a nice enough kid, and the parents have been polite during our brief interactions in the parking lot or getting mail. Last Tuesday evening I was practicing some pieces I was working on for a local recital. It was around 6:30, well within reasonable hours, and I was playing at my usual volume level. I had been practicing for maybe 20 minutes when there was aggressive knocking at my front door. I opened the door to find my neighbour, the mother from next door, standing there, looking very agitated. She said, "You need to stop playing that piano right now." I was confused and asked if the volume was too loud or if there was a problem. She said, "My son is trying to study for an important test tomorrow, and your piano playing is completely disrupting his concentration." I apologised and offered to turn the volume down or take a break for a while so her son could study. She said, "No, you don't understand. He can't concentrate with any noise at all. You need to stop playing completely until he's done with his homework." I explained that it was only 6:30 in the evening and that I always stopped playing by 8 o'clock. She said, "That's not good enough. My son gets home from school at 3:30 and needs complete silence until he finishes all his homework and studying. That means no piano playing between 4 and 9 o'clock on weekdays." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her that I had been practicing piano at reasonable hours for 2 years, and that asking me to stop for 5 hours every weekday was completely unreasonable. She said, "My son's education is more important than your hobby. He's in advanced classes and needs to maintain perfect grades to get into a good college." I pointed out that my piano playing wasn't just a hobby, but something I took seriously, and that I had every right to practice during normal daytime hours. She got more aggressive and said, "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm not asking you to stop forever, just during the hours when my son needs to concentrate." I told her that 4 to 9 o'clock was exactly when most people would be practicing instruments or engaging in other normal household activities. She said, "Normal people don't make noise that disrupts their neighbours' children's education. You're being incredibly selfish and inconsiderate." I tried to explain that playing piano at a reasonable volume during reasonable hours wasn't being selfish. She then said, "Fine, but when my son's grades suffer because he can't concentrate on his homework, that's going to be your fault." I told her that her son's academic performance wasn't my responsibility and that there were other ways to help him concentrate, like closing windows or using white noise. She said he shouldn't have to use earplugs or white noise machines in his own home, just because you insist on making noise. I pointed out that I lived in my own home too and had every right to engage in normal activities. The conversation went in circles for another few minutes, with her insisting that her son's needs should take priority over my piano practice. She said, "I'm a single mother trying to give my son every advantage in life, and you're making that impossible." I felt bad that she was raising her son alone, but I also didn't think that gave her the right to dictate when I could practice piano in my own home. I told her I would try to be mindful of the volume, but that I wouldn't stop practicing during reasonable evening hours. She stormed off saying, "Fine, but don't expect me to be friendly when your noise ruins my son's chances at getting good grades." The next day, I got a note in my mailbox asking me to reconsider my priorities and think about how my unnecessary noise was affecting a child's future. I talked to a few other neighbours about the situation, and they all thought her demands were unreasonable. One neighbour mentioned that she had also approached them about their television being too loud during her son's study hours. I've continued practicing piano at my normal times, but I do try to keep the volume a bit lower in the evenings. I haven't heard from her directly since our conversation, but I've noticed she gives me cold looks whenever we see each other in the complex. The whole situation has made me more aware of how some parents think their child's needs should override everyone else's normal activities. I feel bad for her son because he's probably under tremendous pressure to perform academically, and now he's also caught in this awkward neighbour situation. The nerve of demanding someone stop practicing piano for 5 hours every weekday because it might disturb study time is absolutely wild. This woman really thought her son's homework schedule should dictate when her neighbours could engage in normal household activities. The manipulation of framing it as ruining a child's future while demanding someone give up their own hobbies and interests is peak entitled parent behaviour. That poor kid is probably mortified that his mum is going around the complex trying to control everyone's noise levels during his study time. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that getting good seats at concerts requires more than just showing up early. Entitled, Dad Wanted My Front Row Seat. My name is Brian and I'm a huge music fan. I go to concerts pretty regularly and I always try to get the best seats I can afford. Last month, one of my favourite bands announced a small venue show and I immediately bought tickets when they went on sale. I got lucky and managed to snag a front row seat. It wasn't cheap, but I was really excited about being so close to the stage for this particular band. I had seen them several times before, but never from the front row. The night of the concert, I showed up about an hour before doors opened because I wanted to be one of the first people inside to get settled in my seat. The venue was one of those smaller clubs where, even though you have assigned seating, people sometimes try to move around once the show starts. I got inside, found my seat in the front row, and was really happy with the view. The stage was right there, and I knew I was going to have an amazing experience watching the show. I had my phone out taking a few pictures of the stage setup when this man and his son approached me. The dad looked to be in his 40s and his son was maybe 13 or 14 years old. The dad said, "Excuse me, is this your seat?" I showed him my ticket and confirmed that yes, this was my assigned seat. He said, "Well, we have seats in the back and my son has never been to a concert before. This is his birthday present and he's a huge fan of this band." I congratulated the kid on his birthday and said that was really cool that he was getting to see his favourite band. The dad then said, "I was wondering if you might consider switching seats with us so my son could have the front row experience for his first concert." I looked at their tickets and saw they were in the very back row of the venue. I politely declined and explained that I had specifically bought the front row ticket because I really wanted to be close to the stage for this show. The dad said, "Come on, you're an adult. You've probably been to lots of concerts. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for my son." I told him I understood that, but that I had also paid premium price for my front row seat and was really looking forward to the show from that spot. He said, "Look, I'll make it worth your while. I'll give you an extra $50 to switch seats." I explained that it wasn't about the money, but that I had specifically chosen and paid for this seat because I wanted the front row experience myself. He said, $50 isn't enough. Fine, I'll give you $100. I told him again that I wasn't interested in switching seats at any price. That's when he got more aggressive. He said, "You're really going to deny a kid his dream concert experience? He's been talking about this show for months." I felt bad for the kid who looked embarrassed by his dad's behaviour, but I also wasn't going to give up the seat I had legitimately purchased. I told the dad that if having a front row seat was so important, he should have bought front row tickets when they went on sale. He said those tickets sold out in minutes. We couldn't get front row seats no matter how hard we tried. I pointed out that I had managed to get a front row ticket by being online, right when they went on sale, and being persistent. The dad said, "So because you're better at buying tickets online, my son should have to suffer in the back row for his first concert?" I explained that it wasn't about being better at anything, just that I had put in the effort to get the seat I wanted. He then tried a different approach. He said, "Look at it this way. You'll still hear the music just fine from the back, but for my son, being in the front row could be the difference between a good concert and a life-changing experience. I told him I was sure his son would have a great time no matter where he sat, and that the music would sound good from anywhere in the venue. The dad said, "That's easy for you to say when you get to keep the best seat in the house." The conversation was getting uncomfortable, and other people around us were starting to notice. The kid kept trying to tell his dad it was okay, and that he didn't need to be in the front row, but the dad wasn't listening. He said, "Fine, but I hope you can enjoy the show, knowing that you crushed a teenager's dreams just so you could be a few feet closer to the stage." I told him his son's dreams weren't crushed by sitting in the back row, and that millions of people enjoy concerts from all different seating areas. They went to their seats in the back, but throughout the first half of the show, I could see the dad pointing at me and talking to people around him. It was clear he was complaining about the situation to other concert goers. During intermission, a couple of people actually approached me asking if I was the person who had refused to give up my seat for the birthday boy. They seemed to think I should have been more generous, but I explained that I had bought my ticket fair and square. The show was absolutely incredible, and I had an amazing view from the front row. The band was right there, and I could see every detail of their performance. But the whole experience was somewhat tainted by the guilt trip, and the feeling that people were judging me for keeping my own seat. After the show, as I was leaving, the dad made one final attempt. He approached me and said, "I hope that front row seat was worth disappointing a child on his birthday." I told him his son seemed to really enjoy the show from where they were sitting. The whole experience made me realise how some parents will use their children's desires to try to guilt other people into giving them what they want. The dad could have made his son's first concert experience special, regardless of where they sat, but instead, he chose to focus on what they couldn't have and tried to make it someone else's problem. That level of entitlement over concert seating is just mind-blowing. This dad really thought emotional manipulation and guilt tripping would convince someone to give up a premium seat they had purchased legitimately. The fact that he kept escalating with money offers and then started bad-mouthing this person to other concert goers shows how far some parents will go when they can't get their way. That poor kid was probably mortified that his dad spent half the concert complaining instead of just enjoying the music with him. Let's move to our next story about someone who had a very unusual dining experience. The mother who said I should pay for her kids' meal. I was having lunch by myself at this small family diner downtown last weekend. It's the kind of place with booths along the walls and a few tables in the middle. I had been looking forward to a quiet meal and some time to catch up on reading. I was sitting in a booth near the back of the restaurant, minding my own business and waiting for my food to arrive. The place was moderately busy, but not packed, and I was enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. That's when this woman with a young boy, maybe 7 years old, approached my booth. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at me expectantly. Then she said, "Excuse me, would you mind if my son sat with you? All the other tables are taken." I looked around the restaurant and could see several empty tables and booth spaces. I politely told her that I was planning to eat alone and suggested she ask the hostess about seating options. She said, "Oh, it'll just be for a few minutes while we wait for our table." Before I could respond, she had already directed her son to slide into the booth across from me. She said, "Tommy, sit here with this nice person while Mommy talks to the waitress." Then she walked away toward the front of the restaurant. I was left sitting there with this kid who looked just as confused as I was. He seemed like a polite child, but I hadn't agreed to share my booth with anyone. I figured his mum would be back in a minute to collect him, so I tried to make small conversation. But 10 minutes went by, then 15, and the woman was nowhere to be seen. The waitress brought my food and looked surprised to see a child sitting with me. She asked if we were together, and I explained that the boy's mother had asked him to sit here temporarily. The kid started looking hungry as he watched me eat, so I offered him some of my French fries. His mum still hadn't returned, and I was starting to get concerned about where she had gone. Finally, after about 20 minutes, the woman reappeared, But instead of collecting her son, she slid into the booth next to him and said, "Thanks so much for watching him. You're so sweet." She then flagged down the waitress and ordered food for herself and her son. I assumed they would be moving to their own table once their food was ready, but they just settled in like this was their booth all along. When their food arrived, the woman said, "This is perfect. Tommy was getting so restless waiting, and now he has someone to eat with." I realised she hadn't been waiting for a table at all. She had just decided to join me for lunch without asking. I finished eating and asked for my check, hoping they would take the hint and move to another table. But when the waitress brought my bill, the woman said, "Oh, just put everything on one check. This gentleman is treating us." I was completely stunned. I told the waitress that I was only paying for my own meal and that the woman and her son needed their own separate bill. The woman looked shocked and said, "But you've been eating with Tommy this whole time. I thought you were being generous." I explained that I hadn't invited them to join me and that I had only shared some fries because her son looked hungry. She said, "Well, you seem to be enjoying the company. Tommy really liked talking to you." The waitress looked uncomfortable and said she would need to split the bill. The woman said, "That seems unnecessary. This nice man has plenty of money for lunch, and we're just a single mother, and her son trying to enjoy a meal out." I couldn't believe what was happening. I told her I was happy to pay for my own meal, but that I hadn't agreed to pay for strangers' lunches. She said, "Come on, don't be cheap. It's just a kid's meal and a sandwich. You can afford it." She then tried to guilt-trip me by saying, "Tommy, tell this man how much you enjoyed having lunch with him. Maybe he'll help us out with the bill." The poor kid looked mortified and said, "Mum, we can pay for our own food." I paid for my own meal and left while they were still arguing with the waitress about their bill. The whole experience was so bizarre and uncomfortable. The woman had essentially invited herself and her child to join me for lunch, and then expected me to pay for the privilege. As I was leaving, I could hear her telling other customers about how rude and cheap I had been for not paying for their meal. She was making it sound like I had invited them to eat with me and then refused to cover the cost. The whole situation made me realize how some people will create scenarios where they feel entitled to other people's generosity and then act like victims when that generosity isn't freely given. The sheer audacity of dumping her kid at a stranger's table, ordering food, and then expecting them to pay for everything is absolutely staggering. This woman orchestrated an entire elaborate scheme to get a free meal by using her child as bait and then tried to shame someone for not falling for it. The fact that she was telling other customers how cheap and rude this person was, while literally trying to scam them into paying for her lunch shows the level of delusion some entitled parents operate with. That poor kid seemed to understand how wrong the whole situation was better than his own mother. Our final story for this part comes from someone who learned that even walking your dog isn't safe from entitled parent interference, entitled Mom tried to claim my dog as a gift. I have a 3-year-old golden retriever named Max, who is absolutely the light of my life. He's well-trained, friendly, and just an all-around amazing dog. I take him on walks through my neighbourhood every morning and evening, and he's become pretty popular with the local kids who always want to pet him. Last Tuesday evening, I was walking Max through the park near my house when we encountered this little girl, maybe 6 years old, who immediately ran up to us. She started petting Max and talking to him, which was fine since he loves attention and is great with children. Her mother was sitting on a nearby bench and seemed pleased that her daughter was interacting with Max. She walked over and said, "Your dog is beautiful. What's his name?" I introduced Max and we made small talk about dogs and the weather. The little girl was completely enamored with Max and kept hugging him and asking me questions about what he liked to eat and where he slept. Her mother said, "She's been begging for a dog for months, but we're just not in a position to get one right now." I sympathised and said that dogs were a big responsibility, but really rewarding companions. The mother said, "Yes, that's exactly what I keep telling her. Maybe someday when she's older and we have more space." After a few more minutes, I told them it was nice meeting them and that Max and I needed to continue our walk. The little girl looked sad to see us go, but she said goodbye politely and waved as we walked away. I thought that was the end of it, but the next morning I encountered them again in the same park. The little girl ran up to Max immediately and started playing with him again. Her mother approached and said, "She couldn't stop talking about your dog last night. She's convinced Max is the perfect dog." I said that was sweet and that Max did seem to have that effect on kids. The woman said that was wonderful and asked if I would be interested in doing Max a favour. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, so I asked her to explain. She said, "Well, my daughter's birthday is next month, and she's been absolutely obsessed with your dog. I was thinking maybe you could let her have Max as a birthday present." I was completely shocked and told her that Max was my dog, and that I had no intention of giving him away. She said, "Oh, I didn't mean permanently, maybe just for a few weeks so she could experience having a dog." I explained that you can't just loan out pets like library books and that Max was a member of my family. She said, "But you can see how much joy he brings to my daughter. Don't you think she deserves to have that happiness on her birthday?" I told her that while I was glad her daughter enjoyed meeting Max, he wasn't available to be anyone's birthday present. She said, "Look, I understand you're attached to him, but my daughter has formed a real bond with this dog. It would break her heart if she couldn't have him." The little girl was still playing with Max and seemed oblivious to what her mother was asking for. I said that I was sorry to disappoint her daughter, but that Max was staying with me where he belonged. The woman got more insistent and said, "You don't even have children. You don't understand what it's like when a child wants something this badly. This could be the most important gift she ever receives." I told her that whether or not I had children wasn't relevant and that Max was my responsibility and my companion. She said, "But think about it from her perspective. She's 6 years old and she's fallen in love with your dog. How can you be so cruel?" She then offered to buy Max from me. She said, "I'll give you $500 for him. That's probably more than you paid at the shelter." I was offended and told her that Max wasn't for sale at any price. She said, "Fine, $1,000. That's more than fair for a dog." I explained that Max wasn't merchandise and that no amount of money would convince me to give up my pet. The woman got frustrated and said, "You're being incredibly selfish. My daughter needs this dog more than you do. You're an adult who can get another dog anytime. She's a child who might never get another chance like this." I started walking away with Max, but she followed us. She said, "Wait, let me ask you this. What if we shared custody? My daughter could have Max on weekends, and you could keep him during the week." I told her that was absolutely not happening, and that she needed to stop asking for my dog. She said, "Fine, but you should know that you're crushing a little girl's dreams. She's going to be devastated when I tell her she can't have the dog she loves." I felt terrible for the child, but I also knew that giving in to this woman's demands would be completely insane. I told her that her daughter would understand, and that there were many other ways to make her birthday special. The woman said, "Other ways like what? Nothing will compare to having Max. You're literally ruining her birthday, and you don't even care." I left the park with Max and haven't encountered them since, but the whole experience really shook me up. The casual way this woman asked for my dog, like I should just hand him over to make her child happy, was beyond anything I'd experienced before. That story ends there, and honestly, the nerve of asking someone to give up their beloved pet as a birthday present for a stranger's child is just staggering. This woman really thought she could negotiate custody of someone else's dog like it was a piece of furniture. The fact that she kept escalating with money offers and custody arrangements shows she had completely lost touch with reality. Thank goodness this person stood their ground, because Max belongs exactly where he is. If you enjoyed this batch of Reddit stories and want to hear more every evening, consider hitting the subscribe button. Thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.